The scene opens with two men, one standing tall and the other kneeling in front of him. The standing man drags a blood-soaked sword behind him, its tip scraping against the ground with a dull rasp. He says that it's ironic, even as a celebrated hero, he ended up like this. If only he'd stayed home, safe and comfortable, none of this would have happened. The kneeling man is Hayden Reich, known across the continent as the Fallen Star. The man holding the sword is Julian. As Hayden lifts his gaze, he asks Julian how he could betray him like this. Julian responds coldly, saying Hayden should have treated him better when he was loyally supporting him as a hero. Hayden asks if Julian truly intends to kill his own master. Julian responds with a crooked smile, then breaks into laughter. He declares that it won't be difficult at all. He raises his sword and, without hesitation, brings it down. Hayden's head is severed in a single, clean strike. Everything fades to black. A scream pierces the silence, someone shouting in disbelief. A man clutches his own head, eyes wide in shock. He grabs his monitor, shaking it, yelling that this can't be real. He refuses to believe Hayden just died like that, so pointlessly. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. We learn this man is Lee Sahu. He's outraged because Hayden Reich wasn't just any hero. He was the hero of the Northern Frontline, the one who stood unshaken in the worst of times, a tactical genius and a noble legend. Most importantly, he was the protagonist of * Kill the Demon King starting now, Sihu's favorite game. How could the protagonist die so suddenly, and at the hands of Julian, a traitor who turned on his own master? Sahu yells that Frommel, the game's developer, has betrayed him. They had promised a sequel, and now they've gone and killed off his boy like this. He complains that he's poured endless time and money into this game. It's revealed that he's rank 1, with a jaw-dropping 100,000 hours logged. Likely in-game, not real time. He rants aloud, asking why no one warned him that grass exists, mocking how absorbed he's been in this virtual world. Other fans comment online, speculating that Julian might be the new protagonist. But many can't understand why, especially with his appearance. They call him Slit Eyes. It doesn't seem meant as a racial slur, more a jab at his cunning expression. Sahu doesn't buy it. He insists Julian is nothing but a backstabbing traitor. He declares he'll cancel his pre-order. Hovering over the button, he hesitates for a moment, then he clicks. Pre-order cancelled. He mutters that he had some good times with Kill the Demon King starting now, but he's done with it, completely. Lying back in bed, he grumbles that the whole thing was a rip-off, a waste. But no other game came close to matching its graphics and massive world. It had helped him cope, especially after he started his first job, which left him jaded. He sits up with a sigh. He says the game was his escape. Then he reaches for his potted plant, cradling it gently. He tells himself it's all he has left. Looking after it always cheers him up a bit. He admits he understands now why old people grow orchids, and he hopes it grows well. As he waters it, a sudden notification pops up. He blinks, confused, and wonders what it could be. It's a message from Frommel. They confirm he's the one who's been playing their game for the last 5 years. He wonders if it's just an automated reply. He responds anyway. The next message comes quickly. They ask if he cancelled his pre-order because he wasn't satisfied with the story's ending. He's caught off guard. The way they worded it, it almost feels like they don't plan on giving him a refund. Another notification appears. It tells him to click the link below. Without thinking too hard about it, he clicks. A burst of light explodes from his screen. His glasses fly off as something starts pulling him toward the monitor. He yells that he needs to shut this down, now. He slams the power button and holds it down. Nothing happens. The force keeps dragging him in until the monitor shuts off by itself. He screams, trying to understand what's happening. He feels like he's falling. But where to? Everything around him is pitch black, until a wasteland materializes in the distance. He crashes straight into it. Groaning, he pushes himself up and looks around, asking aloud where he's ended up. Then it clicks. This is the battlefield. The very place Hayden and Julian last clashed. Suddenly, a massive scorpion charges at him, one claw raised to strike. He recognizes it instantly. It's one of the scorpion demons from the game. On cue, a stat window opens before his eyes. It says he's an exceptional swordsman with remarkable instincts. He stares at it, stunned. Then he turns and bolts, screaming, saying that for now, this is all he can do, run. The scorpion charges without pause, forcing him to keep running. Its claws tear through the ground with terrifying ease, and he realizes with a chill that if one of those hits lands, he's finished. It closes the distance rapidly, and he screams in panic, throwing up his arms, convinced he's about to die. But the impact never comes, not the pain, not the blood. Just a dull thud. He blinks in confusion, wondering aloud why it doesn't hurt. The scorpion moves in for another strike, but he ducks under the attack and clenches his jaw. If pain isn't real here, he figures he might as well fight back. So he launches an uppercut straight into the creature's jaw. It staggers backward. His eyes widen. The hit actually worked. He's stunned, not just by the impact, but by how light his body feels, how responsive, nothing like real life. Then it clicks. A message, one he hadn't seen before, flashes through his mind. Frommel had told him to change the story himself. Character repossession, they called it. As the scorpion screeches and leaps toward him again, he turns his back to run, still trying to process it all. He doesn't understand everything, but one thing is becoming clearer. He's not just playing the game, he's inside it. He glances down, reaching instinctively for the weapon at his waist. His fingers wrap around a familiar hilt, and he spreads his feet, grounding himself. He mutters that he's lucky. He's taken over none other than Hayden Wright, the very character he spent thousands of hours mastering. As he swings the blade, a powerful aura surges from the weapon, cutting through the air like a beam of light. It slams into the scorpion, splitting it nearly in two and obliterating the ground beneath. The monster is dead before it hits the dirt. He stares at the carnage and says that it's insane, but expected. This was Hayden's power. Looking down at his hands, he mutters that maybe, with this strength, he can rewrite the ending. Maybe he can stop Hayden from dying at Julian's hands. Maybe he can fix what he hated. Just then, a notification pings. He's earned a new skill, Crescent Slash. It's labeled as a common move, part of his swordsmanship foundation. But he frowns. This doesn't belong to Hayden's moveset. Something isn't right. A suspicion creeps in. He peels off his hoodie and glances at the blade, trying to catch his reflection. The face that stares back isn't Hayden's. Silver hair. A blank, emotionless expression. Narrow, slitted eyes. The status window confirms it. He's not Hayden. He's Julian Cruppert Plusone. He screams in disbelief, unable to accept the twist. He was supposed to be the hero, not the traitor. The window outlines Julian's traits. Demon King's vessel, exceptional swordsman, immaculate mana control, incredible instincts. All of it fits, but none of it feels right. The scene shifts to a lavish estate. Julian, because that's who he is now, stands in front of a mirror, still processing the nightmare. A week has passed since the possession began, and no matter what he tried, he couldn't escape back to reality. He sighs, drained. One of Julian's traits forces him to speak with formal politeness in every language, so even when he thinks something casually or sarcastically, it comes out refined and respectful. It's jarring, but he admits there are upsides. He starts smiling, saying that Julian isn't bad-looking. He now understands why the character was so popular. Something about his proportions. He mutters about having a small head, something Koreans obsess over, apparently. The perspective shifts again. A man trembles nervously, his leg bouncing as he hesitates outside a grand door. He whispers that he doesn't want to go in. Meeting Julian feels like stepping into a grave. Still, he gathers the courage, opens the door, and calls out to Julian. We learn his name is Sir Horn. Julian recognizes him instantly, noting that Horn is a direct blood relative. Horn asks if his body is okay. Julian replies that yes, thanks to Horn's help, he's been fine. Horn breathes a sigh of relief and admits he couldn't believe Julian had fainted. He confesses he might have been too worried and lets out an awkward laugh. The tension between them is thick, both unsure of what the other is really thinking. Julian observes that he expected a servant or minor noble, not Horn himself, to visit. He wonders silently what the man is truly after. Horn tries to read Julian's demeanor. Seeing him so calm despite the situation, Horn considers testing him. He mentions a rumor he heard. Julian asks what kind. Horn says there's talk that Julian lost his memory. The statement takes Julian by surprise. He hadn't heard it before, but now that he thinks about it, the whispers and stares make sense. People had seemed suspicious lately. Horn studies his reaction closely. Julian responds by calling Horn's name in a deep, deliberate tone that sends chills down the man's spine. Then he asks if Horn also believes the rumor. Horn panics. His heart pounds in his chest, and he swears he doesn't. Internally, he realizes his little scheme might have gone too far. But externally, he misreads Julian's intensity as proof that the man knows exactly why he's here, that he's acting under orders from the Noble Elders Association. He has no choice but to drop the act. Clearing his throat, he advises Julian not to take the rumors floating around the maids too seriously. Then he delivers the real reason for his visit. Although Julian is still recovering from his injuries, the Elders Association sent him to deliver a message. We learn that the Elders Association is a powerful group formed by noble families. Bloodline is everything to them, and they don't tolerate any member of a collateral branch, like Julian, trying to rise too high. Despite being from a lesser line, Julian's extraordinary swordsmanship and magical talent have made him a threat, enough of one that the association would rather eliminate him than let him climb higher. And now, with this message, it's clear, Julian needs to tread carefully. Julian asks what the message is, and Horan hesitates, clearly reluctant to say it. Eventually, he explains that Julian has been chosen to participate in the Shut Eyes entrance test, as an instructor. Julian pauses at that. He explains internally that the Shut Eyes are no ordinary group. They're a secretive elite unit, carrying out covert missions for the palace. In public, they serve as the royal guard, but their real duties are far more critical and hidden. Only the most capable warriors are allowed in, and Julian is already a member. That fact alone makes the request strange. The same people who despise him now want him to represent them in this test. That alone raises red flags, and he starts questioning whether he should even take the offer seriously. Horan forces a smile, admitting silently that under normal circumstances, Julian would see through the Elders Association's schemes and decline without hesitation. Now, Horan scrambles to think of a convincing argument. But to his complete disbelief, Julian simply says that he'll accept the request and act as the supervisor. The words hit Horan so hard that he looks like he's about to glitch out of reality. Trying to protest, Horan reminds him that he's still injured, but Julian pulls off his bandages and says that, coincidentally, the wound is already healed. Panic sets in for Horan. He realizes that Julian is dead serious about going, and it's too late to reel him back. He mutters to himself that he's taken the bull by the horns. He assumes Julian must not fully understand the political weight of this, and likely wants to use the opportunity to win some favor, or at least play along. As Horan prepares to leave, hoping to put as much distance as possible between himself and whatever Julian is planning, Julian suddenly tells him to wait. That sends Horan spiraling. He wonders if Julian intends to trap him somehow, maybe keep him from escaping. Julian approaches, sticking out his hand. In it is a plant. He says that he just wanted to give Horan this, claiming it will help ease his mind. Despite the seemingly harmless gesture, Julian's cold, unreadable face makes it feel like something far more sinister. Horan leaves the room looking utterly defeated, his legs trembling so badly that he collapses to his knees the moment he gets far enough away. Panting, drenched in sweat, he mutters to himself that he'd completely forgotten one of Julian's most infamous nicknames, the Smiling Executioner. Now, more than ever, he understands why people call him that. Back in the room, Julian sighs, saying that he's managed to deal with one of them. His room is full of orchids, apparently because he once mentioned he liked them in his sleep. Now, he's trying to get rid of them. He says vaguely that someone is probably waiting for him, though he doesn't clarify who. Then he grabs his sword, saying that if he's going to leave, he's not dumb enough to do so unarmed. And if he's going out, he should at least dress properly. He opens the closet, scowling at the wardrobe. Julian's fashion sense, he complains, is ridiculous. But he admits that if he's going to play this role perfectly and not draw attention, he'll have to dress the part. He steps out, telling Horan that he's ready to go and says he's looking forward to the interview. He also asks where it will be held. The scene cuts to a carriage traveling through a forest. Horan sits across from Julian, repeating what he said earlier, that the Shut Eyes entrance exam will be held on the training grounds of Vile Academy. Julian reflects on the name. In the game, Vile Academy hadn't been a particularly significant location, but he does remember it faintly. He comments aloud that he's curious what kind of place it is. That catches Horan off guard. He expected Julian to know the academy well, after all, he graduated from it. Julian covers quickly, saying that it's been a long time since he was there and things have probably changed. Horan nods, accepting the excuse. He then adds that the academy might be an uncomfortable place to revisit, especially if there are people who still remember the Julian from back then. He expresses hope that those people are long gone. As the carriage slows to a halt, the driver announces their arrival at Vile Academy. Julian steps out and remarks that the place is enormous. He He says he's only ever seen it from inside the game. Horan, visibly shaken, asks Julian to repeat what he just said. Julian lets out a light laugh and brushes it off, claiming he didn't say anything. But Horan's face is pale, he's terrified. Internally, Julian is far from calm. He admits to himself that no matter how advanced the game's graphics were, reality surpasses them. The textures, the weight of the air, the way people react, it's all sharper, more visceral. Horan, meanwhile, is convinced that Julian is plotting something. He wonders why Julian is acting so unreadable and sinister, and what scheme might be unfolding in his mind. Julian can tell that he's scaring him. He says that he actually feels bad about it. He then calls out to Horan again, startling him even more. Julian says that he can leave if he wants. He's grateful for the escort. But Horan responds that since he's already here, he wants to see how the test is conducted. Julian raises a brow at that. He says that he thought Horan couldn't wait to escape, so it's strange that he suddenly wants to stay. Then, something catches his attention. There's a strange, dark haze hovering above Horan. An ominous energy he hasn't sensed before. It doesn't feel like mana, or at least not any kind he's familiar with. It seems more like an emotion, perhaps fear itself. He opens his status window and sees a passive trait listed. Extreme sensitivity to negative emotions directed toward him. The trait allows him to read those emotions based on the aura's color. He confirms it. The aura around Horan is thick with fear. Julian reflects on this. It makes sense. In the game, Julian was always unnervingly good at reading people's emotions. He could manipulate fear to paralyze opponents without ever drawing his sword. He provoked anger so foes would lose control and make critical mistakes. That talent, he realizes now, was rooted in this very trait. He thinks it through. If Horan is afraid but still choosing to stay, then the Elders Association must have sent him here to observe. They likely suspect that something is off and want to keep an eye on him. He knows they see Julian as a threat, a ticking time bomb with too much talent and not enough loyalty. His sudden rise, combined with the rumors about memory loss, would make this the perfect time for them to eliminate him. Julian can't let that happen. He has to survive. He needs to find a way back to the real world. Suddenly, someone bumps into him, and immediately starts apologizing in a panic. The moment the person looks up and meets Julian's eyes, still carrying that naturally menacing look, he lets out a scream and falls backward in fright. Julian internally curses the reaction. Around them, a crowd begins to gather, murmuring. Whispers ripple through the students as they recognize him. They say that it's the royal family's crazed dog, and that the poor fool who bumped into him is as good as dead. Horan tries to de-escalate, urging Julian to calm down, saying the guy's just a kid. Julian hasn't even moved, but the fear is already doing the damage. Still, he gets it. He used to hate Julian too, especially after what he did to Hayden. And just like them, he can feel their emotions. A thick layer of fear, and beneath that, a pulsing heat of anger. He sighs inwardly. Why couldn't Julian have just been a little less terrifying? This kind of attention isn't good. If he becomes too conspicuous, it might blow his cover or worse, get him targeted. He needs to shift the mood somehow. Then a woman's voice cuts through the tension. She greets him, and when he looks up, he finds her standing alarmingly close. Her presence is composed but forceful, and her face is familiar. He recognizes her immediately. Her name is Eileen Denetian, one of the core characters in the game. She's a brilliant mage, an instructor at Vile Academy, and affiliated with the Adrithan Empire's Mage Tower. She controls the metal element and has achieved 5th-tier mastery, all by the age of 24. In the game's Academy arc, she was instrumental in guiding Hayden, offering him insight and advice, which makes her sudden friendliness with Julian all the more confusing. Julian rubs the back of his neck. He decides to play along and says to himself that maybe he can use this opportunity to ease the tension. But then, something about her strikes him. Her aura, it's not fear, it's not anger. It's resentment. And that makes him pause. He wonders what Julian could have possibly done to someone like her. Someone powerful, respected, and not easily provoked. It puts him on edge. He knows she could turn him to ash if she wanted to. He needs to tread carefully, not make things worse. So, instead of backing down, he leans into the role. He asks, with a cold sharpness in his voice, who gave a halfling like her permission to speak to him. Her resentment radiates like a storm cloud, thick and bitter, but she remains silent. The air between them grows tense and awkward. Julian, meanwhile, is internally spiraling. He curses himself for what he just said. That wasn't what he meant at all. Not only did it fail to help, It made everything worse. He admits to himself that maybe he went too far. Still, stubborn and locked into the role of the cold villain, he doubles down. He reaches for his sword and sarcastically wonders if being a halfling also means she only hears half of what's said. Then, keeping up the act, he draws his blade and asks if she knows what kind of sound people make when they die. He takes a step forward, laughing to himself. He assumes she's scared now, that he's regained control of the situation, and this intimidation might finally get her to back down. But that illusion shatters the moment she responds by unleashing a wave of mana. Her tone is cold, authoritative, furious. She says that drawing a blade in this setting, even for someone like him, is unacceptable. Attacking faculty and students is not just a personal offense. It's an act of violence against the academy itself. And she vows she won't forgive it. Julian immediately realizes his plan is falling apart. He'd hoped to spook her, not ignite an actual fight. But it's too late. She declares that he'd better prepare himself. She won't go easy. She moves first, dashing forward with precision and clapping her hands together, forming a spell mid-motion. Julian reacts fast, bringing his blade up and deflecting the spell downward. The resulting shockwave cracks the ground. He wonders aloud if they're seriously fighting now, but she doesn't wait for an answer. Furious that he had the audacity to glance away mid-duel, she shouts for the surrounding students to evacuate immediately. They hesitate at first, but her authority wins out. They begin to scatter. Even Horan bolts, shouting that he should have run when Julian gave him the chance. While her focus shifts to the students, Julian laughs again. He tells her she really shouldn't look away during a fight. He charges forward, breaking through her barrier with a swift strike and tells her that turning her back is a dangerous habit. Her face flushes with frustration and embarrassment. She throws her arms out, firing off another spell with raw emotion behind it. Julian ducks and weaves through the bursts of energy, retreating just far enough to reset. He says to himself that those attacks were no joke. She's actually trying to hit him hard. He notices something else, too. She's panicking. Internally, she didn't mean for the attacks to be lethal. But he dodged them all effortlessly, just like the Julian she remembers. It shakes her. Her mind flashes back to the past. To a time when Julian had been someone else in her eyes. A model noble. The ideal. She remembers seeing him back then, surrounded by other students, laughing and shining with charisma. The girls admired him, some openly fawning over him. Even Eileen, just a freshman at the time, had been swept up in it. His looks, his manner, his confidence. It had all seemed so effortlessly perfect. She had stared from the hallway, gripping her book tightly. In Julian, she saw a symbol of hope, proof that even those from collateral bloodlines like her could be seen, could matter. She truly believed that someone like him could change the social order. And at some point, she confused that admiration with something else. She once handed him a love letter. Her hands shook as she did it. He rejected her, and now, years later, that awkward memory still haunts her, like a private cringe reel looping in her head. Now, with her emotions spiraling, she gathers a powerful burst of mana and hurls it directly at him. He sidesteps at the last second. The spell smashes into the ground where he was standing. He winces, admitting that if he'd been a second slower, it would have been bad. He glances at her face, puzzled. Her cheeks are bright red. He wonders if she's truly that angry, or if there's something else behind it. But for her, it's simple. If she can just land one solid hit, maybe she can finally let go of the frustration and humiliation she's been holding for years. Julian realizes it's time to wrap this up. The longer this goes, the more attention they'll draw. With a flash of movement, he closes the distance behind her in an instant. Before she can react, he taps the back of her head with the hilt of his sword, just enough to let her know the fight's over. He says that they should stop messing around. Eileen's face is still red when she demands to know what Julian thinks he's doing. She accuses him of looking down on her, saying that he could have killed her just now. She felt the mana he was holding back. She asks why he went easy on her, especially without using the moonlight sword. Julian grins and asks if she really wants to know. He begins to laugh, and Eileen's mind takes it the wrong way. She blushes even deeper, thinking maybe, just maybe, he's finally acknowledging her feelings after all this time. But then Julian speaks again. He says that since it's Horan's first time here, he doesn't know the way to the training grounds. And since everyone else is clearly too afraid to guide him, she should take the lead. He calls her a halfling again, casually dismissing her emotions. Eileen's hopes crumble instantly. She realizes her thoughts were pure delusion, and she's stunned that the reason he held back was something so petty. Julian, meanwhile, starts walking ahead, still thinking aloud. He says that the Moonlight Sword isn't just a weapon. It's a symbol of Julian's power and identity. He explains to himself that normally, when aura is channeled into a sword, it becomes visible, glowing and burning. But the Moonlight Sword is different. The blade itself turns an eerie bluish hue, like it's soaked in the light of a full moon. It's a weapon he's known for, one he's used countless times to slay demons. People named it out of fear, reverence, and legend. And now, Julian, no, the man trapped in his body, knows there's no way he could replicate that power. Because he isn't truly Julian. Not really. If Eileen starts to suspect something, things could spiral quickly. He tells himself he has to be careful, she can't figure it out. He steals his expression, trying to look cold and confident, but to Horan and Eileen, it just looks like he's scheming something dangerous. He asks if there's a problem, and they both stiffen immediately, shaking their heads and saying it's nothing. Eileen silently resumes leading them, keeping her distance until they finally arrive at the training grounds of Vile Academy. Julian pushes open the doors, stepping inside with an air of authority. He greets the room, saying he hopes everyone's doing well and apologizes for being late, blaming Eileen for the delay. Her jaw tightens, but she swallows her annoyance and stays quiet. He then introduces himself formally and announces that he'll be conducting the Shut Eyes entrance exam today. He adds that surely everyone here has heard of him. While Julian speaks, Horan scans the group, eyes flicking through the faces until he spots the one he's looking for. He mutters that he knew it. The second son of the Torso family is here. The Torso and Cruppert families have shared a long-standing friendship, making this presence significant. Joining the Shut Eyes is considered one of the greatest honors, an elite organization directly under the Imperial family. But because of that prestige, the exam is brutal. It's a direct battle between the applicant and the instructor. If Julian defeats the second son in front of everyone, he knows the Elder Association will jump on it, framing it as dishonor and using it to bring him down. Julian says that it seems everyone is here to join the Shut Eyes. The students reply with a firm yes, sir. He pauses, then begins laughing. He mocks them, saying all he sees is a crowd of sheltered children. Their swords look more like ornaments than weapons. He warns them that the Shut Eyes is the bloodiest, most unforgiving place in the Empire. As their senior, he says he'll give them a taste of what that's really like. He announces that the exam will now begin. Gripping the hilt of his blade, he says the only requirement to pass is simple: they must kill him. Instant panic spreads among the students. Julian immediately cringes at his own words. He can't believe what just came out of his mouth. Only now does he realize that the entrance exam is a literal duel. Horan had warned him not to go easy on them, but this is a disaster. He only survived Eileen's attack by dodging. In a real duel, under scrutiny, his lack of actual skill might be exposed. He thinks quickly. If he doesn't use the Moonlight Sword, people might assume it never existed. Or worse, they'll start believing he's truly lost his memories. Either way, suspicion will grow. The pressure from the students builds. The weight of Eileen's watchful eyes adds to it. If he acts out of character, she might attack again, and this time, he won't be able to fake his way out. He decides that his only option is to intimidate, to go full villain. He shouts, demanding to know why no one is moving. He declares that the exam ends when he dies, or when there are no more applicants left. His voice echoes through the training grounds. The students stare at him in silence, paralyzed by fear. Then, finally, one of them raises a trembling hand and says that he forfeits. One by one, the students start backing away, eyes wide with fear. Some mutter that they didn't sign up for this, that they're not ready to die, that they don't want to be here anymore. The panic spreads like wildfire. Even the second son of the Torso family, who had tried to keep his composure, clenches his jaw in frustration. But when he sees everyone else retreating, he gives in and follows suit. He wants no part of this madness. Horan stands frozen, disbelief etched across his face. He says there's no way this is happening, but the truth is undeniable. Every single applicant has forfeited. Julian starts to laugh, covering his mouth with a gloved hand as if trying to hold it in. He strides past Eileen and Horan with a smug calm, saying that with no applicants left, the exam is officially over. Inside, he's celebrating like he just beat the final boss. He says that he actually pulled it off. His ruthlessness paid off, just like he hoped. But he shifts his attention to Eileen, curious about her reaction. Did fear finally eclipse her resentment? Yet when he glances at her, he's caught off guard. There's no negative aura. No fear, no hatred, nothing. Just a calm, unreadable expression. He narrows his eyes, wondering if something's wrong with his ability. Is it possible for his emotion-sensing trait to just shut off? Did it break? But then she speaks. She says what he just did reminded her of the past, of the old Julian, the one who avoided unnecessary bloodshed by intimidating his enemies instead of fighting them. Julian is completely lost. His trait only shows negative emotions, but whatever she's feeling now isn't showing up at all. He's left guessing. Later, back at the Shut Eyes base, Horan calls out to him and steps in front to get his attention. He says that Julian did good work today. Julian, though, has something else on his mind. He places both hands on Horan's shoulders and stares at him. Instantly, Horan's knees nearly give out. Fear overtakes him like a wave crashing down. He stammers, asking what's wrong. Julian brushes it off, saying that it's nothing, that Horan was the one who worked hard today. In truth, he was just confirming if his ability still worked, and Horan's reaction gave him his answer. Then another voice bursts in, loud and enthusiastic. Someone yells Julian's name with admiration, saying that his performance at the exam was incredible. Julian turns and asks who the hell he is. The man introduces himself as Lazarus. He says it's an honor to meet Julian and explains that he handles administrative duties at the academy. Then, without taking a breath, he says that the rumors about Julian's memory loss must be false. How else could he have wrapped up the exam without even drawing his sword? Julian is stunned by how much this guy can talk. Lazarus continues, saying that even though the second son of the Torso family was among the applicants, Julian still didn't go easy. He says it was impressive and totally expected of him. Horan cuts in, surprised and sharp, asking if Lazarus is implying that the second son of the Torso family failed the entrance exam. Lazarus quickly backpedals, saying that's not what he meant, but the damage is done. Horan scowls, furious. He accuses Lazarus of arrogance, saying someone still in training shouldn't speak so carelessly, especially given the long-standing relationship between the Torso and Kruppert families. Julian intervenes, saying that Horan is misunderstanding something, or maybe it's the Torso family that's confused. He states that the Shut Eyes don't even accept nobles. As a group directly under the imperial family, they only recruit commoners or fallen nobles. Prestige and lineage mean nothing here. Horan protests, pointing out that he's a noble too. Julian corrects him, reminding him that he's from a collateral line. A halfling of the Kruppert family, not a legitimate heir. That makes him a loyal hound of the Empire, not a Kruppert, not truly. Julian explains further, if the Torso family's son took the exam, knowing full well he wouldn't pass the second screening, then either the family was trying to teach him a lesson through failure, or something else was going on entirely. Maybe this whole exam was a setup from the beginning. Horan starts to tremble. He asks in a low voice if that means Julian knew all along. That he let himself be dragged into this trap even though he was aware of what was happening. That he still brought them along. Julian says that there's no way that's true. Maybe it was just a simple misunderstanding. But the way Horan won't even look at him now tells another story. Julian watches him carefully and says that if it wasn't a misunderstanding, then it would be quite unfortunate for Horan. A short while later, he returns to his estate. The maids greet him at the entrance, bowing politely and welcoming him home. As he walks past them, one asks if he'll be having dinner tonight. He replies that he won't, and adds a firm reminder not to let anyone into his office under any circumstances. They nod, obedient as ever. The moment he steps into the quiet of his office, he sets his sword down on the table and lets out a long, exhausted sigh. He mutters that judging by Horan's reaction earlier, the Elders Association definitely had something planned. It was a setup. He got through the day without being exposed, but luck like that can't last forever. Eventually, they might see through him. And if they do, there's no doubt he'll be thrown out of the Kruppert family. His eyes drift to the sword lying on the desk. The fact that he couldn't summon the Moonlight Sword during the exam still eats at him. That blade wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of Julian's terrifying dominance. If he could wield that power, he could stop pretending and actually overwhelm anyone who tried to oppose him. The thought makes him clench the handle. He decides to try. If there's even the slightest chance he can tap into the Moonlight Sword, he has to take it. Now, while he still has time. Drawing the blade again, he begins to study it. He focuses, waiting for something, anything, to activate. But the aura fades almost immediately. All that's left is his reflection in the steel. He says to himself that it's just as he expected. No aura, no magic, nothing. He reminds himself that Julian's trait, exceptional swordsman, gives him perfect mastery over swordplay. It's written in the stat window that he can wield any type of sword as if he was born with it. But even with that, it's not enough to awaken the Moonlight Sword. In the Empire, there are countless warriors as skilled as the original Julian in terms of raw technique. Dozens, maybe hundreds of named characters with legendary reputations. What set Julian apart wasn't just his swordsmanship, it was his mastery over aura and mana. The way he used it, the way it flowed through his strikes, was on another level. That kind of control comes at a price. One mistake while channeling mana could rupture internal organs. He knows that. But still, he has no choice. If he wants to survive and prove his worth, he has to push forward. He recalls how mana functioned in the game. And if this world mirrors that system, then he already knows the method, because he's done it in-game for thousands of hours. He closes his eyes and starts to focus, pulling the mana stored in his heart and sending it toward his meridian pathways. He whispers to himself that out of the 38 known mana meridians, 6 are vital gray veins. Among them, the one in his head, the Great Vein, connects directly to the heart and serves as the source of pure mana flow. If he can activate it, everything else will follow. Suddenly, something inside him snaps. When he opens his eyes, aura is already pulsing through him. He can feel it swirl and wrap around his body. With determination, he grips the sword tightly and tries to relocate the aura from his core into the blade. But the resistance is overwhelming. The transfer isn't smooth, and the strain makes it feel like his veins are burning. Still, he knows this body is capable of it. Julian was born for this. After several painful seconds, something finally gives. A shimmer of light dances along the blade, just for a moment. It works, briefly. A flicker. A success, sort of. He stares at the sword and says that while the aura has taken shape, it's still weak and unstable. If he had to compare it to the moon, it would be a thin crescent. But a crescent is still part of the moon. It has begun. The following day, he's back at the training area. With a deep breath, he lowers his stance and draws his sword in one smooth motion. In a flash, he slices through 3 practice dummies. Each one is cleanly severed, and as the pieces fall apart, a glow flickers along the edge of the blade, the Moonlight Sword, faint but present. He remarks that at the very least, he's reached the skill level of a proper knight. And all it took was a day. Not bad. But now comes the hard part, completing the Moonlight Sword. Refining it, perfecting it. The problem is, his knowledge of the game's mechanics is starting to hit its limit. There are gaps, things he never paid attention to before, things the game didn't explain. What he needs now is someone who knew Julian personally. Someone who can offer insight, even if they don't realize they're helping an imposter. He needs answers. And fast. One of the maids gently calls out, informing Julian that he has a visitor. He pauses for a moment, genuinely wondering if Julian, the real one, had any friends, but regardless, the timing is perfect. That fleeting hope dies instantly when he sees who it is. It's Lazarus. Julian stares at him, unimpressed. Internally, he says he had been wrong to expect anything useful. It's just the tier 1000 yapper again. Lazarus beams, clearly not reading the room, and expresses surprise that Julian remembers his name. He asks if it's because of how talkative he was yesterday. Julian shoots him a flat look and says he wouldn't forget someone who talks that much even if he tried. He genuinely can't tell whether Lazarus is fearless, or just hopelessly stupid. He asks him bluntly why he's here. Lazarus explains that it's a simple matter. He received an order from the commander himself to confirm the results of the Shut-Eyes entrance exam that was held at the academy. Julian furrows his brow. He could have sworn Lazarus was there and saw the outcome firsthand. Lazarus cheerfully clarifies that even so, official procedure requires the results to be formally delivered by the examiner. It's protocol. Julian remarks that it sounds like busywork, just another layer of bureaucratic nonsense. Still, he gives his response. 0 applicants passed. Lazarus nods, saying he'll report it to the commander right away, but as he turns to leave, Julian freezes. Something clicks in his mind. He tells Lazarus to wait. He asks to confirm. Lazarus is heading directly to the commander? Lazarus says yes, that's correct. Julian then says he'll go himself. Lazarus blinks in confusion and asks if he's serious. Julian replies that he is, and offers to ride with him in the carriage. Lazarus' cheerful energy falters, and he starts showing signs of unease. He asks timidly if this has anything to do with yesterday, clearly worried he's in trouble. Julian smirks and says no, he's just being considerate. After all, Lazarus might feel uncomfortable traveling back alone. Then he mutters internally that maybe he really should have lived a kinder life. But now that he has the excuse, he plans to go straight to the commander himself. The man knew Julian well. He's hoping to gain some insight, something only someone close to the real Julian would know. And if he plays this right, he might also be able to ensure the Kruppert family never gets a chance to interfere with Shut Eye's matters again. The scene cuts. At Shut Eye's headquarters, a man bursts into the commander's office without knocking, clearly alarmed. The commander, raising an eyebrow, calmly asks what the emergency is. The man says that someone has shown up in person. The commander's tone sharpens, asking who it is. The man swallows hard and replies, "It's Julian Kruppert himself." The commander slowly pushes his chair back from the desk, clearly unsettled. He repeats the name, asking if he's certain. Meanwhile, far from the tension inside the base, Julian finds himself staring in awe at a breathtaking structure. The Audritan Imperial Palace. He can barely believe it's real, no longer pixels and pre-rendered graphics, but stone, gold, and power. He whispers to himself that he's finally seeing it with his own eyes. This story, we are told, takes place on the Rosinda continent, a land ruled by 3 dominant nations. Of them, the Audritan Empire stands at the pinnacle. It rose to power after the fall of the demon king Barbados. In the chaos that followed his sealing, the monarchy unified fractured territories and forged them into a superpower. The greatest symbol of that rise is this palace, an imperial stronghold that commands reverence from the entire continent. And now, Julian stands before it, not as a player, but as someone living within it. Julian stood before the grand imperial palace, awestruck. His heart swelled, and tears welled in his eyes. He had dreamed of seeing this place for years, but now he was truly here, in the flesh. Despite the overwhelming emotion, his face betrayed nothing. His expression remained cold and composed, the perfect Julian poker face. Behind him, Lazarus watched with growing unease. He noticed the faint smile tugging at Julian's lips and felt his stomach twist. He thought to himself that Julian's smile wasn't warm or comforting, it was terrifying. It didn't match the moment at all. Why was he smiling like that? As Lazarus walked a step behind, thoughts flooded his head. This wasn't like Julian. Normally, he would never show up personally. He always sent a servant to handle reports. And now here he was, walking beside a low-ranking apprentice like himself, reporting directly to the commander of the Shut Eyes. Whispers spread the moment Julian stepped through the gates. People turned their heads, voices hushed but urgent. They asked what was going on. Why had Julian appeared in person? One man leaned in close to another and murmured that Julian didn't look injured at all. So was the memory loss just a rumor? Meanwhile, Julian continued walking with that unnerving grin still playing on his face, every step measured. Lazarus followed behind, his legs shaky. He thought to himself that this was an incredible honor, unimaginable even. But it was also the kind of honor that might knock him out cold. As they moved through the palace grounds, Julian remarked aloud that the view was as beautiful as ever. He seemed genuinely impressed by the scenery. Lazarus, blinking in disbelief, nodded and agreed hesitantly, still unsure what kind of mood Julian was actually in. Julian then mentioned that the commander should be near the second gate. He explained that this gate, the Jongchona gate, was the first one, open to all. Lazarus stared at him, confused. He thought to himself that everyone already knew that. Why was Julian explaining something so basic? A dreadful thought crossed Lazarus' mind. Was this a test? His eyes darted around in panic. He clenched his jaw, telling himself that if this really was a test, and if he failed to guide Julian properly, then he might be dismissed, or worse, labeled unqualified. That possibility terrified him. He imagined himself back in training again, humiliated. He placed a trembling hand on his head, already feeling the weight of failure. Julian, still admiring the palace, commented that it seemed even larger than it looked in the game. He had trouble figuring out where the Shut Eye's headquarters was located within all this grandeur. Noticing Lazarus acting strange, twisting his face and moving awkwardly, Julian asked if something was wrong. He wondered aloud if Lazarus was sick. Lazarus jolted and quickly denied it, insisting in a stammer that good health was the most important trait for any member of the Shut Eyes. Eventually, they arrived in front of a tall, elegant building, the headquarters of the Shut Eyes. Its architecture was flawless, a fusion of strength and refinement. Julian paused before the entrance and said that they had finally arrived. Lazarus immediately turned to him with hopeful eyes and asked if he had passed. Julian blinked, confused, and asked what he meant. Lazarus hesitated, his voice barely a whisper, wondering if this entire thing had been a secret test. Julian frowned, visibly irritated, and said that it was not a test, not even close. He asked why on earth he would be testing Lazarus. But Lazarus didn't seem to care about the answer. A wave of relief washed over his face, and he smiled wide, declaring that he was now officially a full member of the Shut Eyes. Julian watched him, perplexed. He muttered under his breath, wondering why Lazarus always said such bizarre things. But Lazarus offered no explanation. Instead, he simply bowed again and again, repeating his thanks before cheerfully excusing himself. As Lazarus walked away, actually singing to himself, Julian watched, stunned. He thought to himself that Lazarus was an odd one, to say the least. Then again, he wasn't exactly in a position to judge anyone's sanity. After all, he was still pretending to be Julian Cruppert. A soldier stepped out from the front of the Shut Eyes headquarters and addressed Julian with a sharp salute. He announced that Commander Odwin had given permission. Julian could enter. Julian thought to himself that it was finally time to meet Commander Odwin Balladeer, his superior, and the only heir of the once mighty Balladeer family. The Shut Eyes, a group loyal only to the Imperial family, had been unified and shaped solely by Odwin's skill and leadership. No one else could have done it. As he followed the soldier down the hall, Julian's thoughts churned. He admitted to himself that he felt nervous. When they reached the command room, Julian took a deep breath, steadied himself, and announced his entrance. From inside, a voice, calm but authoritative, told him to come in. The door opened, and there she was. Commander Odwin Balladeer sat at her desk, scribbling notes in a thick book. She looked up at him without any expression of surprise and greeted him, noting that it had been a long time since they last saw each other. She said she'd heard he was injured, and asked if he was fully recovered. Julian stared, and 1,000 thoughts ran through his mind. This was the legendary commander of the Shut Eyes? The same Odwin Balladeer known for her ruthless strategy and iron command? She looked like a child. A teenage girl, small and slight, seated calmly behind the desk. It was unsettling. He thought to himself that there was no mistaking the description. Odwin was supposed to be small, but this was smaller than he had imagined. And was she really a girl? Or just incredibly young-looking? As if reading his thoughts, because she was, Commander Odwin pointed at him sharply and declared that he had just been thinking about her height. Flustered, Julian quickly denied it aloud, though the panic in his voice betrayed him. Internally, the man inside Julian, Lee Sahu, marveled that she could read his mind. That confirmed it. This was indeed the commander. Odwin returned to the topic of his injury and ordered him to give a report. Julian fidgeted nervously, one hand gripping the other behind his back. His thoughts spun again. How could he possibly explain anything to her? She wasn't ordinary. She wasn't someone he could bluff or charm. Sweat formed on his brow. He worried that if he said something wrong, she might begin to suspect him, and behind him, the guards subtly placed their hands on their swords, ready to act. Even Julian, a man known for his cold demeanor and formidable presence, respected this commander. She was not someone to underestimate. Finally, gathering himself, he thanked her and admitted that it had not been a minor injury, but, he added firmly, his loyalty to the imperial family remained unshaken. That was something no wound could compromise. Odwin studied him carefully, her expression unreadable. She seemed surprised by the answer, and for a moment, her mind wandered. She placed a finger to her chest and tapped lightly, as if trying to access something deep inside. Then, in a sudden burst of energy, she slammed her hand on the desk and stood up. She walked toward him, her eyes sharp. She said that something was strange. She asked if he had always spoken like this. Then she held her sword under his chin and said she could tell, something wasn't right. Julian's thoughts turned grim. He told himself that this was it, the color of injustice. The moment when suspicion would blossom into something dangerous. Then, unexpectedly, a glowing panel flashed into view. Again, the phrase appeared, the color of injustice. Julian, or rather, Lee Sahu, trapped in his body, clutched his head and scolded himself. He asked aloud how the original Julian had treated his superior before. And then, acting on sudden impulse, he grasped the blade pointed at him and leaned closer to the commander. With a chilling smirk, he said they should begin, like a proper villain would. He stared straight into Odwin's eyes and asked, mockingly, if there was any problem here. The commander blinked. Then she stepped back, lowering her sword. She turned away and walked back to her desk. She said it was rare for someone to visit the main headquarters of the Shut Eyes in person. Most instructors submitted their reports and left without saying a word. That was how it had always been. She added that Julian had suddenly become responsible. Julian stood stiffly, trapped in the body of the infamous Julian Cruppert, and his thoughts churned in disbelief. He remarked inwardly that if this had truly been Julian acting, he would have known better than to blur the lines between personal opinion and official protocol within the shut eyes. He admitted he had underestimated Julian far more than he should have. Approaching the commander's desk, he said with careful confidence that although Julian had been recovering from an injury, he had come to deliver the report personally. The commander responded with a short acknowledgement, asking if that was so. Julian's eyes flickered with unease, and he told himself to summon the same fearless composure Julian would have had. He marched toward her desk, masking his nerves with boldness, and remarked with a sharp edge whether she was also planning to regulate who came through the door now. The commander, hearing the tone, studied him coolly. She thought that he was already showing signs of rebellion the moment he returned. How typical. She then mentioned that she'd heard he had been in poor condition due to the injury, but now he appeared just fine. Julian, swallowing irritation, admitted silently that her words were true, but hearing them still stung. He noted that anyone who could speak so openly to Julian's face without flinching wasn't ordinary. There was something unique about Odwin. The commander, now seated again, requested the report. Julian handed it over without hesitation. As she flipped through the pages, she asked if anyone of note had emerged from the recent recruitment test. Julian responded without emotion. No. She sighed, saying that she had expected as much. After all, Julian had trained under the sword Saint Hayden Reich. Ordinary talent meant nothing to him. Still, she asked if there had been even one candidate worthy enough to consider as an apprentice. Julian gave the same answer. No, this time. The commander looked up from the report, surprised. She repeated his words with disbelief, asking if he truly hadn't selected anyone. Julian, with an expression of feigned innocence, confirmed it again. That triggered her fury. Her voice dropped into a dangerously serious tone as she asked why. When he didn't answer, her voice rose. Again, she demanded to know why. Unable to restrain herself, she shot up from her chair, slammed her hand on the desk, and yelled at him. She shouted that his decision made no sense. She questioned whether he had lost his mind. Julian remained still, unaffected on the surface. Inside, he noted grimly that this was the outburst he had expected. Odwin continued, her anger intensifying. She reminded him that the shut eyes were already suffering from a severe shortage of capable members. Even one decent recruit could have made a difference. Julian, heart pounding, admitted to himself that the commander, even when furious, was dangerously compelling. Out loud, he stated that they couldn't accept just anyone out of desperation. All the applicants this time were unqualified to serve in the shut eyes. Odwin slammed her fist again, shouting that if he had at least appointed someone as an apprentice and tested them under supervision, there was a chance one of them could have proven useful. Julian countered with calmness. He said it would have been a waste of time. None had even met the standards of an apprentice. Inside, though, he admitted he had simply avoided that fight altogether. That only pushed her over the edge. She snapped that it was all nonsense and screamed at him to get out, immediately. Julian, unfazed, chuckled softly and said he had a proposal to offer before leaving. The commander narrowed her eyes and asked, nearly growling, what absurdity he was going to throw at her next. Julian reminded himself that to survive, he had to continue playing his role as convincingly as possible. He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded letter, and placed it gently on her desk. Odwin glanced at it warily and asked what it was. Julian explained that he had taken the liberty of organizing his thoughts on the flaws in the recent recruitment process, and he had arranged them through simulated sparring sessions. As she picked up the letter, she asked what kind of problems he had found. Julian, posture unwavering, stated that all the candidates lacked a proper understanding of what it meant to join the shut eyes. They showed no real sense of alertness or readiness. The commander stared at him, her expression unreadable. She repeated his words as a thought. So that was it? Then she mused silently that this couldn't be an ordinary proposal. It was too focused, too pointed. She admitted aloud that it made sense. Applicants should understand the nature of the organization they were attempting to join, before they even attempted to pass the test. Then her gaze dropped to the letter again. She began reading. And her eyes widened. The commander's eyes scanned the letter Julian had handed her. The document was brief, but its contents were explosive. It clearly stated that any individual participating in the recruitment test would do so at their own risk. Should injury or death occur during the process, the Shut Eyes organization would bear no responsibility. She snapped her head up, her tone rising with sharp disbelief. She exclaimed that it sounded like Julian intended to make this more than just a recruitment test. She demanded to know if what he truly meant was to conduct the test with lethal intent. Was she understanding this correctly? Julian responded not with words, but laughter. Cold, measured laughter that echoed across the room. He offered no answer. The commander narrowed her eyes, then pointed back at the letter, her thoughts racing. No answer, so that was confirmation enough. He wasn't denying it. She found the whole thing strange. Julian was second in command of the Shut Eyes, a rank just beneath her own. Yet never before had he interfered with the organization's internal policies. Never before had he challenged procedures so directly. She muttered a quiet affirmation to herself. Yes, that was exactly what it looked like. Then she leaned forward, resting her head in her hand, and asked if he had really declined to select a candidate in the recent test because he feared he might be held accountable if any of them were injured. Her voice carried a tone that danced between annoyance and disbelief. Julian grinned and admitted, with that same infuriating nonchalance, that it was partly due to that concern, and partly because those who managed to pass such a flawed test would have been utterly useless anyway. The commander fell silent. She couldn't find a retort. Julian pressed on. He added that it would be a disgrace to tarnish the name of the Shut Eyes with mediocrity. After all, weren't they an extension of the imperial family itself? The moment the royal family was mentioned, the commander snapped. She cut him off immediately, saying she understood. She repeated it, twice, as if trying to shut down the conversation before it spiraled further. With a groan of frustration, she said that whenever the topic of the imperial family came up, Julian always had more to say. Then, regaining her composure, she declared that she would submit the proposal to the council. Though, she added, she couldn't guarantee it would be approved. Julian bowed slightly, placing a hand over his chest in a gesture of formality. He thanked her and announced that he would take his leave. As he turned to go, the commander called out abruptly and told him to wait. She said she'd heard a letter had arrived from the royal secretariat, addressed to his office. She told him to go and check on it. Julian paused, then glanced back with a smile and acknowledged her words. Without another word, he left the room. The commander watched him go, her gaze following him until he was out of sight. Then she looked down at the letter once more. The words echoed in her mind. The Shut Eyes will not be held responsible for any accidents. She leaned back in her chair, lost in thought. If someone were to die during the test, she realized, they would be protected under royal decree. It would be legal. Sanitized. And still, the nature of the Shut Eyes wouldn't change. Since its inception, only fallen nobles and politically unaffiliated commoners had been allowed to apply. People without power were easier to silence. So far, that policy had worked without issue. But now, her thoughts returned to Julian. If he knew all of this, and clearly, he did. What was the real aim of this proposal? She concluded that Julian must have realized the test had been tampered with, that the Elder Council and the Torso family had manipulated the process. This was his retaliation. He had understood their schemes. And now, if he were to oversee another test, he wouldn't let things end as they had before. This was the message he was sending. He intended to shock the Elder Council with the same ruthless methods they'd used on him. She stood abruptly and called out, asking if anyone was outside. A soldier stepped in and saluted, saying he was present. The commander handed him Julian's letter and instructed him to deliver it to the council. The soldier accepted the document, nodded firmly, and said he understood. Then he turned and left. The room fell into silence again. Alone, the commander sat back and exhaled slowly. Her thoughts drifted. She reflected on how much Julian had changed since that major injury. Once known as the Empire's loyal hound, he had always followed the Imperial command without question. That was why people called him the Royal Dog, obedient, emotionless, and reliable. But now, she felt a weight press against her chest as the thought took shape. Now, he seemed different. As if the chains had broken. As if the beast had begun to act on his own will, building an identity outside of the leash that once held him. She frowned and muttered to herself that this was going to be a problem. A serious one. She would have to keep an eye on him, carefully, constantly. The scene cuts to Julian, who states that he actually made it all the way to his office in the Shut Eyes headquarters. He reflects that private offices are rarely assigned in the Shut Eyes. There's usually no need, as agents are expected to remain mobile. If the organization went out of its way to give him a private room, he wonders aloud just how absurdly extravagant it must be. When he opens the door, his eyes land on a jarring combination of lavish dresses and unsettling decorations. He remarks that there's an overwhelming number of luxury items that have absolutely nothing to do with work, and that this place is even worse than his own house, which, he admits, is saying something. He concludes that he must be dealing with someone truly unhinged. Everything looks expensive, but in the ugliest way possible. He acknowledges that he can't bring himself to like the room's original occupant. The person clearly has atrocious taste. As he steps further inside, his foot lands on something unexpected, prompting him to say that the guy must be a hoarder. A knock interrupts his judgment. He tells the visitor to enter, and the door opens to reveal none other than Lazarus. The young man announces that he has come to deliver a letter from the imperial family and extends it toward Julian. Julian mutters that this must be the letter the captain had mentioned earlier. Just as Lazarus turns to leave, Julian tells him to wait. He says the timing is perfect. He needs the sculptures loaded onto the carriage he arrived in. They shouldn't be heavy. Lazarus's expression shifts into panic. He asks if Julian really means all of them. He says that he can't believe he's been handed another task and comments that at this rate, he probably won't remain a trainee for long. Then he assures Julian that he'll begin moving them right away. Julian watches him and wonders aloud why he's making such a weird face. As Lazarus lifts one of the treasure chests, he stumbles into a creepy doll statue. He falls flat on his face but manages to protect the chest in his arms. Julian looks on in disbelief, saying that the kid really is a handful. Without missing a beat, Lazarus springs up, unsheathes a sword, and presses it against his own throat. He apologizes profusely, saying he can't believe he messed up in front of Julian. Julian quickly tells him there's no need for that. Thinking the trainee is too tightly wound, he tries to lighten the mood with a joke. He says that if Lazarus died here, the real hassle would be cleaning up the mess. He tells him to keep moving the stuff. Lazarus doesn't laugh, he simply replies with a grim, "Okay." Julian remarks that Lazarus is probably terrified because of the body he's currently in. He says it's understandable and turns his attention to the letter. The imperial seal matches the one from the game, and it's addressed directly to Sir Julian, naming both his family and the shut eyes. He skims through it quickly, thankful he can actually read the language, and summarizes that it says if he's recovered, he's expected to return to duty. He mutters that they're clearly trying to work him to death, though they've sugar-coated it well. Still, he's not about to complain. He thinks gaining real-world experience is crucial now, especially since he still hasn't found any clues about the Moonlight Sword. The letter assigns him to a mission, the restoration of a resonant stone. He begins to explain what those are. He says that in the game, the world is plagued by demons, entities born from the remnants of the demon god Barbados. After Barbados died, his lingering essence either infected living beings or turned into physical monstrosities. These beings became known as demons and started attacking humanity. To combat them, people use resonant stones, powerful artifacts passed down from the Age of Mages. Julian marvels at the idea that anyone could forge stones using mana. Since he's not a mage himself, he assumes the mission will involve guarding the one who is. He doesn't see a good reason to refuse, even if fighting demons always carries risk. If he pulls it off, it might finally shut down the rumors and suspicion surrounding him. He wonders aloud who the mage in charge will be. Handling resonant stones requires serious magical skill, so he just hopes it's someone competent. The perspective shifts to Eileen, who's stretching inside the Imperial Palace. She complains that she's still being forced to write reports even after earning the title of professor. She grumbles that constantly proving oneself seems to be the mage's eternal burden. Still, she feels the Imperial family is asking too much. Someone taps her shoulder. She turns, curious, as a voice asks what she's doing here. Eileen recognizes the girl and greets her warmly. It's Diana. She says it's been far too long and asks how Diana's doing. Diana replies that Eileen must be drowning in work now that she's the youngest professor, and she mentions how hard it's become to even run into her. Eileen chuckles, saying Diana doesn't need to flatter her. Diana asks if Eileen's free, because she's headed to a tea party and wants her to come along. Eileen politely declines, explaining that she has to work on her thesis. Diana remarks that she's as diligent as ever, and the scene reminds her of their student days. She adds that nothing about Eileen seems to have changed. Noticing something seems off, Diana begins to comment on Eileen's expression, but then something behind her catches her eye. She points it out, saying she recognizes it as Julian's carriage. Eileen turns and confirms it. She says the crest belongs to Julian's family, no doubt about it. Diana comments that she heard he was on the verge of death not long ago and calls him persistent for showing up already. Eileen frowns and admits she agrees. Diana picks up on her tone. She says that this must mean what she thinks it means, and asks if Eileen still has feelings for him. Eileen quickly denies it, saying she has no idea what Diana is talking about. Diana laughs, saying Eileen used to be such a sweet girl. Then she brings up a story, She remembers when Eileen once heard a rumor that if you confessed under the cherry tree, you'd never be rejected, and how she called Julian over there and actually did it. Eileen suddenly says that they should go to the tea party together. Diana raises an eyebrow and reminds her that she said she was busy. Eileen lets out an awkward laugh, admitting that she just realized she had a bit of free time after all. Her face turns crimson, and Diana chuckles, telling her there's no need to be embarrassed. After all, everyone liked Julian back then. Eileen agrees, saying Diana's right. Thinking back, he really was a different person before. That all changed after he returned from the Northern Front and joined the Shut Eyes. Since then, everything about him shifted, his attitude, his energy. He's not the same man anymore. Diana tells her she should just go and say hello. Eileen quickly shoots back that just because she used to like him doesn't mean she still does. She says there's no need for her to see his face, at least not anytime soon. Diana, curious, asks why. In response, Eileen raises a hand and begins to channel magic. A faint glow surrounds her fingers as she summons a sealed envelope into her palm. Diana's eyes widen in recognition. She exclaims that it's a letter from the Imperial family. Eileen confirms it with a nod and explains that she's been assigned a mission. Diana asks what kind, and Eileen tells her flatly that she's been put in charge of the restoration of a resonant stone. Diana reacts with mild surprise, knowing full well what kind of assignment that entails. The scene shifts. A group of knights marches in formation, murmuring among themselves about the unusual number of troops present. One of them wonders aloud if they're about to meet someone of high status. Another points out that even the Blue Lion Knights are accompanying the Shut Eyes on this mission, and it's said that Sir Julian himself will be there. The first knight seems impressed and says he heard rumors that Julian lost parts of his memory after an injury. His friend brushes it off, saying that's probably just gossip spread by people who dislike him. He adds that Julian always had a fearsome reputation, and someone like that wouldn't fall to a mere wound. Julian, meanwhile, listens from a distance and thinks to himself that taking this mission was the right call. Public opinion is clearly shifting in his favor. Two knights approach and greet him, Fern and Heinrich, both members of the Blue Lion Knights. Julian comments that the Blue Lions are still as dependable as ever. They respond that their priority is safely escorting the mages. Julian says there's no predicting what might happen out there, then lets out a laugh, not from amusement, but from unease at the thought of demons. His expression, however, is so intense that the others misread it and nervously laugh along. Fern then brings up a proposal, with Heinrich following suit. They ask if Julian would consider riding in the carriage to Gielan instead of marching with the escort. Fern explains that it would allow the knights to manage security more effectively. Julian considers it. On the surface, it sounds like a generous offer, but he sees through it. The Blue Lions are an imperial regular unit, largely composed of nobles. Unlike the Shut Eyes, they care deeply about status. They're clearly trying to keep a branch family member like him in the background, away from the spotlight. He sighs internally, thinking that in most novels, people who end up in another world live grand lives. But here he is, stuck as the villain in someone else's story, being boxed in by class politics. Still, he admits that traveling by carriage sounds more comfortable than making small talk with scheming nobles. Fern and Heinrich interpret his silence as acceptance and express relief, saying they're glad they worked through that misunderstanding. But Julian suddenly freezes as someone steps forward. She walks with composure, greeting everyone and remarking that the weather is beautiful today. She introduces herself by her full academic and government titles, officially declaring that she's in charge of the resonant stone restoration. As soon as she sees Julian, her breath catches. Julian's eyes widen in disbelief. He immediately says that maybe the carriage isn't the best idea after all. Eileen flushes red, wondering why he's here. But more than that, she knows he's actively avoiding her. Julian, meanwhile, mentally groans. He thinks she's unpredictable, and that makes her difficult to deal with. Not knowing what she's thinking unnerves him. Fern and Heinrich exchange confused looks. They whisper to each other, trying to figure out why Julian is suddenly reversing his decision. Fern clenches his jaw, suspecting that Julian caught on to his subtle plan to sideline him. He admits grudgingly that Julian must be the type to survive the imperial court's cutthroat politics without aligning to any faction. Still, he's just from a collateral branch. How dare he act like this? Fern thinks he's arrogant, just because the royal family favors him. But Julian isn't playing political games. He just really didn't expect to be stuck in a carriage with Eileen. She seems just as disturbed by the idea as he is. He tells himself that the faster they complete this mission, the sooner he can avoid running into her again. He resolves to keep things efficient and professional. The group eventually arrives in Gilan. Julian looks around and mutters that the city is ridiculously small. Fern and Heinrich glare at him, irritated. Julian adds that, despite them coming all the way from the capital, there isn't even a proper welcoming party. A local man steps forward, recognizing the group. He greets them warmly and thanks Julian for making the trip. He offers to guide them directly to the location of the resonant stone. They head toward a tall clock tower where fragments of glowing stone float eerily in the air. Eileen takes charge, directing boxes and supplies to specific positions. She says she's very sensitive to mana and needs things arranged precisely. The local man approaches and asks if she'd like to examine the damage. She agrees, and they walk together to the base of the tower. The crystal is visibly fractured, with deep cracks running through it. Eileen frowns, saying the damage is too extensive for standard repair. She tells him a partial replacement will be necessary. The man looks alarmed. Eileen reassures him that the barrier will temporarily vanish during the procedure, but it won't take long. He nods, saying he trusts her expertise. She rolls up her sleeves and reaches out to the resonant stone, her fingers glowing as they make contact. She says that the initial preparations are complete. Now, she just needs to inform Julian that the barrier will briefly disappear. She winces at the thought of talking to him again but reminds herself that this is her job, she's a professor now. With effort, she stiffens her posture and calls out to Julian, saying that she has something important to tell him. He starts walking away, and she realizes he's dodging her again. She raises her voice and insists that he listen. It's not just personal, it's vital to the mission. She catches up, grabs the edge of his uniform, and says this is too much. They're supposed to be professionals on official duty. She says she has to know, and bluntly asks why he keeps avoiding her. Julian tries to deflect, asking when he ever did that. He accuses her of constantly following him. His tone is so matter-of-fact that it almost sounds convincing. Eileen starts to stumble over her words, frustrated and flustered. She says that something is seriously wrong with him, but the worst part is, somehow, he still manages to make it sound logical. Eileen snaps that whatever he's saying isn't the point right now. Julian raises an eyebrow and sarcastically asks what is, then immediately accuses her of being a stalker. Her expression darkens. She says that she's been holding back, but this is getting ridiculous, and she can't believe he's actually saying this. Before the argument can escalate further, a scream pierces the air, raw, panicked, and deafening. Both of them freeze as someone yells with everything in them that a demon is here. Julian stiffens, the color draining from his face. Eileen turns to him and says that this is exactly what she was trying to tell him earlier, that the barrier would drop and demons would appear, but he just kept dodging her instead of listening. Another scream cuts through the chaos, and this time it's followed by a sickening crash. Heinrich flies past them like a ragdoll, slamming violently into a nearby wall. His armor crumples on impact, and he slumps to the ground motionless. Julian stares down at Heinrich, his heart sinking. Something cold coils around his spine. He says that based on the pressure he's feeling, they're up against a two-horned demon. His voice trembles as he repeats it, 2 horns. That wasn't supposed to happen. He mutters that this is seriously bad. Eileen rushes to his side, asking what's happening, but Julian tells her to stay back, it's not safe. She lifts her eyes toward the beast now standing at the center of the chaos. Her breath catches. She says that she can't believe it, a demon this powerful, here of all places? It doesn't make sense. Her hands start to shake as she realizes how unprepared she is. She admits she doesn't know any combat spells, and the resonant stone isn't operational yet. She begins to panic, trying to calculate what options they even have. The demon begins muttering in the language of enchantment. Shadows spill from its body, and several ghoul-like creatures emerge. One of them drops directly in front of Eileen. Julian tightens his grip on his sword and steps between her and the creature, slashing it down in one clean movement. He tells her that letting her guard down like this is reckless and that someone like her, who can be rattled by something so minor, is clearly too naive. He says that he'll handle things here, her job is to do what only she can. Eileen blinks, stunned, and asks what he means. Julian points at her, declaring that she's responsible for restoring the resonant stone. That's her mission. His mission is to protect her. He asks if the situation has shaken her so badly that she's forgotten what they came here to do. Realizing he's right, she dashes off, shouting that it'll take 7 more minutes before the stone is ready. As she runs, she calls out to him one last time. He asks what it is now. She says that she's begging him not to get hurt, she can't use healing magic. Julian responds coolly, saying that getting injured in a situation like this would be difficult for him. But as soon as the words leave his mouth, he knows he's lying. He's terrified. He hadn't expected to face a two-horned demon so early into his fieldwork. Still, retreat isn't an option. Too many people are watching. If he ran now, the rumors would explode. He reminds himself that if this were the real Julian, this would be nothing. The real Julian would already be on the attack. Fern suddenly bursts onto the scene, shouting at Julian to hold back while the Blue Lion Order handles the monster. His unit sweeps in, hacking away at the lesser demons with military precision. He shouts that they'll just keep chipping away until the big one drops. Fern laughs, throwing a glance at Julian and asking mockingly if he's frozen from fear. He says this doesn't feel like Julian at all. Julian chuckles back, saying that's exactly right. He starts laughing louder, more confidently. Fern watches him in confusion, unsure why Julian would be laughing at a time like this. Julian tells himself that this is the life he's in now. If he really is Julian, then fear doesn't belong here. Not in moments like this. This is the battlefield. This is where Julian thrives. The demon lunges, a massive arm swinging toward him. Julian's aura explodes outward. His unique trait, exceptional swordsman, activates. In a burst of speed, he leaps through the air, blade drawn. He cuts across the demon's hand in a clean arc. The force of his slash sends a shockwave all the way up the demon's arm. Fern gasps in disbelief. He says that it's impossible, no one should be able to cause that much damage with a single strike. Julian doesn't hear him. He's already falling into the rhythm of the fight. Demon blood splashes across his face, and he grins through it. He says that he's glad, it means this will work. He charges forward, launching himself high again, this time going straight for the demon's horns. He slashes downward and cuts into one of them. The horn cracks, a chunk snapping off and spiraling through the air. Julian feels himself getting absorbed into the moment, lost in the adrenaline. But then the demon looks up at him. A fist the size of a boulder comes crashing into Julian's chest. The impact sends him flying backwards. He hits the ground hard, and blood spills from his mouth. Every nerve in his body screams in pain. He says he can't even breathe. He admits that maybe, just maybe, he overestimated himself. Still, he knows what must be done. No running. No pause. The demon's eyes flash again as it raises both arms and slams them down, aiming to crush Julian entirely. A cloud of debris erupts from the ground. The Blue Lion Knights freeze, eyes wide. One of them whispers the question on all their minds, was Julian defeated? Fern declares that there's no way Julian could have taken down the two-horned demon by himself, and announces that it's now his turn to command the scene. But before he can act, a soldier cries out, pointing ahead in disbelief. Fern follows his gaze, and freezes. Emerging from the dust and fading chaos is Julian's figure, outlined by the remnants of magic and shadow. His sword, once dull steel, now gleams with a strange, pulsing blue aura. Murmurs ripple through the soldiers. They whisper the name with awe, the Moonlight Sword. Though only Julian knows the truth. This version is incomplete, a flawed imitation of the legendary weapon. Still, the illusion is convincing enough. Julian says that it may not be even half as powerful as the real deal, but for now, it'll serve. With a manic grin, he charges at the demon, laughing as he surges forward. The demon snarls back with a cackling laugh of its own, lunging at Julian in response. Julian shifts, sidestepping effortlessly. He comments on how fast it is for something so huge, but adds that he's already memorized its movements. He says he's going to try using a new ability, the trait of insight. As the demon unleashes a flurry of vicious strikes, Julian's eyes narrow. He can see every attack's path in advance. With the bare minimum movement needed, he weaves through them, left, right, duck, pivot, dodging each one like a dancer on a battlefield. Every motion is clean, efficient, lethal. The Blue Lion soldiers erupt with shouts of disbelief, watching Julian move like a ghost among death blows. One of them says it's like watching a masterclass in survival. Fern, now clearly uneasy, admits that Julian's strength might be even greater than the rumors suggested. Meanwhile, back at the tower, the final piece of the resonant crystal clicks into place. A magical hum fills the air as a massive circle ignites around it. Eileen, breathless and covered in sweat, exclaims that the restoration is complete. She runs to the edge of the tower and shouts down that the barrier will reactivate soon. As the demon turns to look, distracted by her voice, Julian smirks. He says that looking away mid-battle is one of the dumbest things an opponent can do. He promises the creature won't live long enough to regret it. Energy erupts from his blade, A massive blue wave that blasts outward like a living storm. Julian moves in a zigzag pattern, each step sinking with a slash. The aura slices clean through the demon, disorienting it and slowing its regeneration. Eileen stands frozen in disbelief. So does the Blue Lion Order. Julian's blade cuts straight through the demon's skull in a final, precise strike, splitting it in two. For a heartbeat, all is still. Then the pieces fall, sliced meat and shattered bone hitting the dirt behind him as Julian calmly resheathes his sword. The silence breaks with a squelch, followed by his heavy breathing. He wipes sweat from his brow and mutters that he can't believe that actually worked. Everyone stares at him with a mix of awe and fear. He notes that of course they're scared, he is a villain, after all. That's how they see him, and after displaying that kind of power, it only makes sense. One soldier stumbles forward and calls out to him. When Julian asks what's wrong, the soldier grabs his hand and thanks him profusely. He says he truly believed they were all going to die. More cheers erupt from the soldiers. Julian looks around, stunned by the praise. Even Fern steps up, reluctantly thanking him for the effort. Julian gives a polite smile, and Fern immediately feels unsettled. Julian casually asks if he can leave the rest of the cleanup to them. He says he's not exactly built for follow-up management. Fern agrees, though his voice carries a strange tension. He says Julian really is different. Even among nobles, he stands apart. He wonders how someone can remain so composed after a fight like that. He mutters that Julian must not even be human, and he doesn't mean that as an insult. Later, Julian walks into a quiet forest, finding a secluded pond where he finally collapses onto a rock and lets out a long, exhausted sigh. He says that whole ordeal was far too dangerous. The fear and adrenaline had him shaking more than he wants to admit. His hands tremble slightly as he recalls the demon's face. He says it was terrifying. Cutting through that monster left a horrible sensation in his bones. He wonders how the real Julian ever got used to things like that. Then he admits something even stranger. The longer he stays in this body, the more his thoughts seem to shift. He says he's starting to scare himself, becoming more like Julian with each fight. Curious, he pulls up his status window. A new ability glows on the screen. He explains that the trait of insight came from the fusion of his own knowledge and Julian's combat memory. Together, they created a power that reveals an enemy's weaknesses. He says that this trait will be useful, it'll help keep suspicion away, but there's still one major flaw. The Moonlight Sword is incomplete. Julian looks down at the blade and draws it slowly. The metal is nicked and worn, the surface scratched from the intense battle. He says he had to pour an absurd amount of mana into it just to trigger the aura. Neither the power nor the stability matches the real version. But as he obsesses over the issue of stability, a spark lights in his eyes. He smiles and says that maybe, just maybe, he's got an idea. The scene cuts to a grand hall draped in banners. Robed men fill the chamber, murmuring among themselves. A familiar figure steps forward. The Noble Elders Association has convened. One of the elders gestures for the man to sit. It's Horrend, and his entire body is shaking. The elder asks him if he's saying Julian saw through the plan. Horrend doesn't answer at first. His lips quiver. His hands tremble. Finally, in a barely audible voice, he says yes, that seems to be the case. The elder leans back and says that he knew Horrend's incompetence would one day drag them into danger. He adds that if Horrend weren't blood related to the current family head, he would have had him executed on the spot. Horrend lowers his head, apologizing profusely as he addresses the man across the table as Lord Ern. His voice trembles with guilt and fear. Another figure in the room leans forward and informs Ern that the shut eyes have been moving strangely as of late. He says they've recently submitted a proposal directly to the Imperial Secretary's office. The proposal, he explains, changes the framework of the entrance exams. From now on, the responsibility will no longer lie with the instructors. Even if a participant dies during the test, the shut eyes will not be held accountable. All of it will fall under the protection of the Imperial family's name. Ern's eyes widen at the revelation. A third man slams his fist against the table and declares that this is clearly Julian's doing. He says it's an underhanded warning to them, an assertion of dominance, cloaked in official procedure. They scoff at the idea, calling Julian nothing more than the Imperial family's pet, and now he dares to pull this? But another noble interrupts with a different take. He tells Ern that this situation, while frustrating, is also an opportunity. Ern narrows his eyes and asks what exactly he means. He turns specifically to Lord Aiden for clarification. Aiden leans back in his chair and says that up until now, Julian has been strictly obedient to the Imperial family. He followed their orders to the letter. But this new move suggests he's starting to make independent decisions. That kind of change creates openings. He speaks metaphorically, saying that it's like someone finally removing their shackles, only to end up injuring themselves in the process. Julian, he suggests, might have broken free only to expose a weakness. Aiden proposes that unlike before, when they could conveniently send Julian off to the northern front, he may now become more manipulable. They just need to observe him carefully, not provoke him. Someone asks if Aiden truly means to just let Julian act freely. Aiden laughs and says yes. He suggests they sit back for now and let the situation unfold on its own. Back with Julian, he reflects that although the mission was short, it left him drained. Too much mana spent, too quickly. Yet he's content. The plants in his quarters are thriving, their greenery bringing a rare peace of mind. He says that decorating the space the way he likes actually helps him stay grounded. He's pleased to see the plants so lively. But more than that, the mission yielded valuable outcomes. The rumors about him have taken a hit, and he may have gained something even better. He opens the chest Lazarus carried during the mission and pulls out a shimmering crystal. He says that this might be the key to completing the Moonlight Sword. The idea, he explains, came to him after seeing the resonant stone in action. In the game, all objects could absorb mana, but gemstones from the Empire were particularly efficient. Their mana conductivity and capacity were unmatched. That's what made the resonant stones so effective. He theorizes. What if there were a layer between him and the blade, something that acted as a mana conduit? Something that could stabilize and focus the flow of energy. As he channels mana into the gemstone, it fractures and crumbles in his hand. He watches it disintegrate and says that clearly, this one wasn't compatible. He needs to find a gemstone that matches his mana signature perfectly. A knock interrupts his thoughts. He assumes it must be time for dinner and calls out for the butler to enter. Instead, it's Lazarus, once again. Julian comments on how often they seem to be running into each other lately. Lazarus replies that the captain has asked Julian to report to the Imperial Secretary's office. Julian raises a brow and asks if he's certain. Lazarus affirms it. With a sigh, Julian stands and says that he'll need to store the remaining gemstones for now. Completing the Moonlight Sword will have to wait. He muses that it's no surprise the Secretary's office wants to see him, especially given the fresh wave of rumors. As he prepares to leave, Lazarus hesitates, then asks what should be done with the shattered gemstones. Julian casually tells him to toss them. Lazarus protests, they're rare and valuable, but ultimately nods and accepts the order. The scene jumps to Julian stepping into the Imperial Secretary's office. He remarks on how extravagant the place is compared to the utilitarian structure of the Shut-Eye's headquarters. He approaches the reception desk and introduces himself, saying he's there to meet Sir Sedan Orby. The receptionist informs him that Sedan is currently occupied with another guest and invites him to wait in the designated room. Julian nods and thinks to himself that whoever's inside must outrank him. As he walks into the waiting room, he notes that even this space looks expensive, something he never got to see in the game. His eyes land on a sword lying casually across the couch. He finds it strange, such a crude, weighty thing in the middle of such refinement. It doesn't belong here. But as he steps closer, he notices the craftsmanship. He says the weapon is clunky, yes, but unmistakably used by someone skilled. He begins to read the inscription along the blade's side. A strong body harbors a strong mind. His eyes narrow in recognition. Before he can finish, a woman's voice barks at him to take his hands off the sword. She calls him a lunatic. Julian doesn't even have to turn around. He knows the voice. She says the sword was a gift from her master. He instantly identifies her. She's one of Hayden's disciples. In the game, her name was Rin Ronbel, and she died a brutal death at his hands, or rather, Julian's. He remembers watching her final breath in that timeline, the image seared into his memory. Yet here she is, very much alive, and the sword confirms it. Julian watches her closely. He thinks that she may become key, maybe even vital, to finding a way out of this world. The young swordswoman stood firm, her eyes shut, her blade pointed skyward, glowing faintly. Her name was Lynn Rondabelle, daughter of the noble Rondabelle family, a bloodline rooted deep in the imperial knighthood. But Lynn wasn't merely a legacy, she was a force. A sharp, gifted fighter, known not just for her skill but for her unwavering loyalty to Hayden Reich and his companions. She was one of Reich's own disciples, and her eyes, when open, burned with a focus that cut as clean as her sword. Her golden hair framed a face as composed as it was beautiful, and she carried both grace and lethality in equal measure. Some even whispered that she could one day eclipse the great Julian himself. That potential set her apart. She was the shining knight who beamed whenever Reich patted her head. Everyone knew she adored her master, Hayden Reich, with unquestioning devotion. And when she wore that wedding dress, the entire community had paused. The dress became iconic, celebrated in forums and constantly topping player polls. Yet now, that same breathtaking figure stood before Julian with eyes colder than steel. To her, he was the enemy. A system warning flashed in his vision. Negative emotion detected, hatred. Lin's expression tightened as she demanded in a voice hard as ice what he intended to do with her father's sword. Julian raised both hands in mock surrender, wearing a crooked smile that didn't reach his eyes. He said he only wanted to take a look. Inside, though, he was already scheming. Perhaps he could push her buttons, draw out some information, maybe even make her drop her guard. He added with casual ease that he was surprised someone like her would leave such a valuable sword just lying around. Lin chuckled softly. She said that her master wasn't some reckless fool who felt the need to carry a weapon everywhere inside the imperial palace, unlike him. Julian's thoughts clicked into place. He noted that she was exactly what he expected. Meticulous, rigidly upright. He then shifted tactics, asking slyly if the guest who'd come before him had been the sword Saint Hayden Reich. Her eyes sharpened like twin daggers. She demanded to know what that had to do with him. Julian covered his mouth and let out a short laugh. He said he was merely curious. After all, Reich had once been his teacher too. Inside, Julian marked her reaction carefully. Her hands shook with fury, her grip on her sword tightening until her knuckles blanched. Without warning, red flames flared to life around her. Her voice was raw, laced with pure rage, as she growled and asked what he had just said. How dare he speak that name? Negative emotion detected. Rage. Sweat rolled down Julian's temple as he forced his grin to hold. Yep. She was beyond furious. He cursed himself silently. Maybe he'd pushed too far. Before the tension could boil over, the wooden door creaked open. A voice from within called out, requesting that Miss Lin report to the secretary's office. She turned without hesitation, striding away, scowling as she did. She said goodbye with an icy finality, pointing directly at him. She added that she hoped they never met again. But then, the voice called again, this time summoning Sir Julian as well. All three froze. Julian exhaled slowly and reminded himself to stay cool. He pasted on his best charming smile and walked toward Lin, who looked as if the ground had just betrayed her. He told her not to be so cold. After all, they shared the same master. He even winked. Inside, he was thinking that he might be seeing Hayden Reich again very soon, but Lin's expression didn't soften. With clenched teeth and a look sharp enough to cut steel, she said that wouldn't happen again. She turned to leave, her voice dropping low with warning. She told him never to speak of her master again. Julian said nothing. He just smiled faintly to himself, thoughts twisting in his mind. He was about to meet his favorite character, only now he was the traitor in their story. He wasn't sure if he should feel thrilled or terrified. His hand curled tighter around the piece of paper marked with the sword insignia. A man at a desk nearby shuffled some papers into a neat stack before greeting them both warmly. He welcomed Miss Lin and Sir Julian to the Imperial Secretary's office. He leaned forward slightly, his expression polite but curious. He said he'd heard about Julian's recent mission. Was it true he'd defeated the two-horned demon alone? Julian shrugged and gave a soft laugh. He said that was just a warm-up. Lin, visibly irritated, cut in immediately. She demanded to know where her master was. Julian stayed quiet but mirrored her curiosity. He had been wondering the same thing. The man's tone shifted to something more formal. He explained that Lord Hayden Reich had left shortly after assigning Lin her last task. Her eyes widened. She asked what he meant. The man continued, saying that Reich had also instructed someone to accompany her, Sir Julian. Lin erupted. She shouted her disbelief. Why did she have to be paired with a traitor? Unfazed, the man explained that the mission could be dangerous, and since Sir Julian was present, Lord Reich asked for him to be assigned. Julian smiled awkwardly, sweat trickling down his face. Lin's expression darkened further. She whispered under her breath, questioning what her master was thinking. The man let out a dry chuckle and gave his order, investigate the slums. Julian leaned his chin into his hand, wearing a confident smirk. The slums, huh? Beside him, Lin sneered. She said she didn't see why they had to care about some filthy slum district. The man clarified. According to reports, strange and terrifying creatures had begun to appear in that area, demons. But the locals had rejected royal intervention. That, he explained, was why Lin and Julian were the right fit. They were tied to the crown but not part of it. As members of the Night Academy and the Surface faction, they could act without stirring political unrest. The sky was gray as they approached the slums, rooftops sagging, cobblestones slick and dark. A place built by those the Empire had conquered and forgotten. A sanctuary for the unwanted. Julian's red eyes glinted. Because they hated the royal family, he reasoned, they'd chosen the Surface as neutral ground. Smart. He wore a pleasant smile, but inside his mind was racing. Lin stood at his side, still unsure about this assignment. He knew that if she outshone him here, her path to becoming Sword Saint would be far smoother. Partnering with her didn't help him. But as the royal family's hunting dog, he had no say in the matter. He rubbed his chin, a slow grin forming. He said he'd take the mission. Immediately, Lin shouted her refusal, her arms snapping up. Deep down, Julian wanted to scream too. But the clerk's next words froze her in place. He said her master personally requested that she accept the mission. Julian leaned in, his tone needling, asking if she planned to go against her master's wishes. That made Lin break into a cold sweat. She faltered. Then, with quiet frustration, she said she understood. Gritting her teeth, she thought bitterly about what it meant to bear the title of Hayden's disciple. Julian watched her carefully. He knew she'd monitor his every move from this point on. But his strength wasn't enough to resist her, not yet. His gaze shifted to the green gemstone hanging from her neck. If only he could get his hands on a gem compatible with his mana. And then, without warning, a surge of energy snapped through the air, breaking his train of thought. Alarmed, Julian pointed toward the stone, his voice sharp with urgency as he asked what kind of gem it was. Lin responded with a scowl, explaining that it was a moonstone. But before she could elaborate, the gem pulsed with a strange energy and lifted into the air, glowing with an ethereal blue light. A shimmering aura wrapped around them both, suspending them in silence and awe. Seconds later, the glow faded and the world returned to stillness. Lin spun around, her eyes alight with suspicion and fury. She demanded to know what he had just done. She wasn't sure herself why the moonstone reacted. It shouldn't have. It never had before. Julian raised his hands in mock innocence, laughing nervously. He said the gem had simply caught his eye. That was all. But then, flashing a sly smile, he admitted that for a moment, it felt like the stone tried to resonate with his mana, maybe even absorb it. He realized it right then. The answer had been close all along. He needed that gem. Without delay, Julian headed straight for the nearest gem shop. The clerk recognized him instantly, greeting him with polite enthusiasm, remarking that it had been a long time. When asked if he was looking for anything special, Julian responded with a brilliant smile, saying he needed a gemstone compatible with his mana, specifically a moonstone. The clerk's demeanor shifted, his face tightening with discomfort. He admitted that their shop didn't carry moonstones, and as far as he knew, neither did anyone else. They were incredibly rare, mined with difficulty, and usually sought only by eccentric private collectors. No shop kept them in stock. Julian's face darkened. He muttered bitterly that he needed the moonstone blade ready before the mission with Lin. His red eyes flared, and he demanded confirmation. Was the clerk telling him there was no way to get one? The clerk shrank under the weight of Julian's gaze, trembling slightly as he realized he'd spoken too casually to a man of Julian's status. Quickly, he backpedaled, stammering that moonstones could still be found, just not at the moment. Internally, Julian exhaled in relief. He leaned in, his voice low and tense, ordering the man to go find one. Urgently. He forced a smile but couldn't hide the pressure in his tone. He vowed to himself that if it came to it, he'd search the entire empire. Lin would notice if the moonstone sword was incomplete, and he couldn't allow that to happen. The day of the mission arrived. As Julian stepped outside, he muttered under his breath that maybe he hadn't friended the clerk hard enough. He was still empty-handed. Bitterness stirred in his chest. Lin stood nearby, arms crossed, her voice cold and heavy with sarcasm. She questioned whether his important business was actually at a jewelry store. Julian laughed awkwardly, replying that one day she'd understand the beauty of gemstones. She said nothing, just turned on her heel and told him to follow. He called after her, pointing out that she was heading in the wrong direction. With visible irritation, she turned around and snapped, asking what he meant. Julian grinned and explained that the slums were a labyrinth of illegal buildings and hidden paths. You couldn't just follow signs and maps. Lin unfolded her map and declared that she'd rather rely on printed signs than trust him. Julian gave a helpless smile. She wasn't wrong. But he knew this zone, the Eastern Slum, was a death trap for rookies. Even the game developers had acknowledged it was notoriously difficult. Lin's grip tightened on the map. Her voice dropped into something wary and sharp as she accused him of trying to trap her. She said that as the disciple of the Sword Saint, she wouldn't fall for the tricks of a traitor. A radiant golden light flashed around her as she said that unlike him, she was different. She intended to become the next Sword Saint. Her eyes burned with ambition, her tone unwavering, her posture proud. Her voice rang with conviction. Julian scratched his cheek, his smile awkward. He couldn't help thinking she had gotten the wrong idea somewhere along the line. With that, she turned and walked away decisively, leaving Julian standing there, confused and slightly amused. He muttered to himself that this mission wouldn't be easy. The clear blue sky hung above them as Julian's voice rang out with concern. He asked if she was truly planning to take that particular path, noting the danger signs weren't there for decoration. Lin furrowed her brow as she studied the map and asked if First Officer Julian had ever visited this slum in secret. Julian hesitated. He hadn't. Not exactly. He dodged the question by throwing one back at her, asking what she thought. She caught the evasion instantly and pressed him further. She demanded to know how he planned to navigate if he didn't know the way. Julian simply smiled, pointing to the sky and saying he would rely on instinct. Lin looked at him like he was insane. Sighing, she pushed forward and mumbled that they should just split up and get it over with. Julian followed behind, reminding her that the Empire's orders had been clear, they had to work together. His next words triggered something fierce in her. Her voice flared, and her eyes burned with rage. She snapped, asking if he thought Hayden Reich was more important than Imperial orders. She told him to never speak her master's name again. Her hands clenched into trembling fists. Julian kept his smile intact, playing it cool even though he felt the heat of her fury. Lin's thoughts turned bitter. She acknowledged to herself that Julian was still a step above her. Everyone had said it, compared them endlessly. The weight of it bore down on her. She told herself that if it had been him, the mission would already be done. If it were him, the answer would already be found. If it were him. But then something in her eyes shifted. Her brow furrowed, her shoulders squared. She remembered who she was. The top disciple of the Sword Saint. She resolved to prove herself through this mission. Suddenly, she froze. Her eyes locked on a wooden sign reading 011C. She stared in disbelief. Julian stepped up behind her and asked, feigning curiosity, what was wrong. She brushed him off quickly, claiming it was nothing, but inside, panic erupted. She clutched her head, mentally screaming. The paths had changed. They were walking in circles. And then they reached another sign, 01A. Her heart sank. They were back at the beginning. Julian covered his mouth to hide a chuckle. He watched her silent meltdown with mild amusement. Just then, a stranger called out to Lin, his tone light and friendly. He said it looked like she was going in circles and that this must be her first time here. When she asked if he knew the area, he nodded confidently and offered to guide her, on one condition. She'd have to buy him a drink. Lin agreed with a resigned sigh. The man introduced himself as Baden. When Lin gave her full name, Lin Rondebel, his smile widened. Inside, he was thrilled. He thought he'd just hit the jackpot. Julian felt something off and started to speak, but before he could finish, Baden cut him off, saying he didn't care about his name, just to follow along. Julian rubbed his chin thoughtfully, convinced he'd heard the name Baden before, though he couldn't place it. The three of them entered a dim tavern. Baden shouted to the barkeep, ordering drinks for himself and his two friends. Lin eyed him warily, noting how casually he drank before even guiding them. As they sat, the barkeep asked where they were from. Lin answered, the royal capital. The barkeep responded with a price. 30 nars each. Lin blinked in disbelief and repeated the amount aloud. Baden leaned in, teasing that she must not carry money. He warned that prices in the slums were high. Lin shook her head and reached into her pouch, pulling out a small bag that glittered with gold. She said 30 nars seemed too cheap. Baden froze. A noble, he realized. His mind raced. He darted over to the barkeep and whispered for the special drinks. The strongest kind. Once the Imperials were drunk, they'd clean them out. The barkeep nodded. A hand slipped something into the drinks. 3 glasses were brought to their table. The barkeep declared them the best in the slums. Lin grabbed hers without hesitation. But before the glass touched her lips, Julian's hand shot out, snatching it away. He asked what had been added to the wine, still smiling but with eyes that gleamed like blades. Baden tried to play dumb, yelling in protest. Julian thrust the glass toward him and demanded that he drink it himself. Baden hesitated. Julian leaned in, his voice chilling, and asked if he should pour it down his throat instead. Lin called out for him to stop. The room went still. At the sound of his name, both Baden and the barkeep froze. The latter whispered urgently, asking if that really was Julian, the Imperial dog. Sweat slid down Baden's face, but he tried to stay composed. He reminded himself that he wasn't alone. Dangerous men filled the tavern, his men. He reached into his coat and pulled out a dagger, smiling darkly. He thought to himself that he wasn't weak either. A hand shot forward, flooding the room with green light. Julian spoke with a cold, razor-sharp grin, saying that he had given them a chance to come clean. Suddenly, one of Baden's men lunged with a sword. Julian caught the attacker by the throat with his bare hand, lifting him off the ground, just in time to see another enemy charging in from behind. With a swift, fluid motion, Julian hurled the man in his grip across the room, sending him crashing into another attacker with bone-jarring force. The two collapsed in a heap, stunned and groaning. Julian stood tall, unshaken, power radiating from him in thick, pulsing waves. His blood-red eyes gleamed with a predatory light, and the tension in the room thickened. Lin's reaction was immediate. She drew her blade with a sharp ring, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow as she tried to make sense of the chaos. She muttered to herself, questioning what was happening, panic slipping into her voice. The other men in the tavern, once confident, now stood frozen. They watched Julian with widening eyes, terror creeping into their expressions. Overpowered by a single man, completely. Julian's lips curled into a cold smile. He raised a jagged, blood-streaked shard of broken glass and pointed it directly at Baden, who stood with a trembling throat inches from the blade. Julian stated clearly that he didn't care what kind of trick Baden had attempted. He wouldn't let this slum become any messier. His eyes scanned the rest of the tavern, picking out the other patrons. The smirk on his face deepened. He called them out as Baden's lackeys. The moment of truth had come. Baden stood paralyzed, drenched in sweat, unable to move as the glass trembled against his throat. Julian barked at him to order his men to stand down. He warned that if they kept their weapons drawn, they'd share the same fate as the shattered glass. The silence was suffocating until Baden, voice cracking, shouted in desperation for his people to retreat. Reluctantly, they obeyed, grumbling and backing off with gritted teeth. The tension deflated, if only slightly. Julian lowered the shard, setting it on the table with a clink. He exhaled slowly and said that all this could have been avoided with honest answers. If they had cooperated, surrender would have been an option. Baden stumbled backward, speechless, before finally choking out a surrender. Julian lowered himself into a chair, his tone shifting to something cool and commanding. He offered Baden a choice, between death and surrender. He recommended the latter. With a dangerous smile playing on his lips, Julian told him to decide. Baden, shoulders sagging in defeat, muttered his surrender once again. Behind him, Lin stepped forward, her voice cutting and her blade pressed against Baden's back. She seconded the offer, saying that surrender would be preferable to dying. Trembling, Baden raised his hands in submission. Julian, satisfied, asked once more for confirmation. Baden gave a final, quiet nod. Outside the tavern, Julian led the way, casually mentioning that he'd been suspicious the moment Baden offered to guide them. He admitted he'd assumed Baden was just a petty thug, but now it looked like they'd uncovered a slum-wide crime ring. A scrap of paper fluttered in his hand as he smiled, clearly pleased with the unexpected outcome. He had gained useful information. Behind him, Lin trailed with her head bowed, burdened by self-blame. She whispered that it was her fault for not noticing Baden's true nature earlier. Julian responded with easy confidence, agreeing, though with a teasing edge. He said that someone of her upbringing had likely never encountered people like that. Lin said nothing, her head lowering further, Julian paused, watching her. Was she beginning to lose confidence? After a quiet moment, she asked how he knew. How had he spotted the trap? Julian turned and smiled, recognizing the curiosity in her voice. She urged him to explain. Her hands were clasped together, her posture tense but respectful. Julian thought to himself that despite her dislike for him, she still sought to learn. That was just like Lynn Rondebel, proud, but never too proud to grow. He extended a hand, letting a green glow pulse across his fingers. He explained that he sensed hostility within the glass itself, a reaction triggered by his mana detection trait. Lynn repeated the term, visibly intrigued. A system notification seemed to echo in her mind. Mana detection trait unlocked. Julian elaborated, saying everything, objects, people, places, carried traces of mana. When two forces of mana met, they reacted. He turned slightly, soft green sparks trailing from his hand, and said he had used mana detection before they even stepped into the tavern. He recalled how Baden's mana had already felt aggressive back then. That had been the first sign. Lynn nodded slowly, trying to picture it. She compared it to sonar, like bat echolocation. Julian laughed, admitting the analogy worked, more or less. He walked forward, letting more of his mana pulse freely. He noted that most mages used this skill, but because his mana output was so high, it was easy for him to sense things others couldn't. Lynn, thoughtful, posed another question. She pointed out that Julian hadn't asked Baden anything about demons, only about living conditions in the slums. Julian smiled cryptically and confirmed that was true. Then he turned the question around. He asked Lynn what she knew about demonization. After a pause, she recited what she had been taught. That remnants of the demon king Barbados could possess non-human life, spreading corruption and transforming beasts into monsters. Julian gently corrected her, explaining that the slum's geography made things different. The capital was surrounded by resonating stones, barriers no demon could cross. No nearby forests, no animals to corrupt. Only humans. The realization dawned slowly. Lynn's face drained of color. She said, with a trembling voice, that if no other hosts existed, the only choice left was humans. Julian nodded. That's what he believed was happening. Lynn clutched her forehead, visibly shaken. She cursed herself for believing in him, even for a moment. But Julian held up 3 fingers. He said that 3 households were scheduled to pick up fever medicine that week, high fever, a common sign of demonization. He grinned and told her that if he was wrong, she could punish him however she liked. Lynn remained unsure. Should she believe him? As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of crimson, black birds cawed overhead. They approached the last house. Julian noted her brighter expression and commented that she looked relieved. She waved her hand excitedly and said that if they hadn't seen any demonization, it had to be a good thing. Julian agreed, though his eyes remained cautious. He knocked on the final door. No answer. Eventually, an old man with bloodshot eyes peeked out warily. Julian leaned forward, trying to observe more closely. He noted something off. The man didn't appear demonized yet, but his aura felt strange. Julian smiled and asked how he was doing. But in his head, something clicked. That smell. He'd encountered it before on missions involving resonating stones. He quietly identified it as the scent of demon blood. Lynn stepped forward and introduced them formally, stating they were from the royal court. Julian added his name. Julian Creepartson of the One Eye. The old man's face changed immediately. He shouted for them to leave and slammed the door. But Julian caught it with one hand and shoved it open. The old man stumbled backward, hitting the floor. Julian stepped inside, mocking him with formal thanks for his cooperation. Lynn followed, demanding an explanation. He ignored her, praising her kindness instead. She asked what he meant, more confused than ever. His red eyes gleamed. He said that kindness would eventually destroy her. He approached a sealed door bound in iron chains. Lynn protested. They weren't there to attack anyone. He replied that the Empire only cared about results. Her eyes widened. What? Julian held up a sheet of data, gesturing to a steaming bowl on the table. He noted that according to records, the old man lived with one son. But there were 3 servings of food. He stirred the soup and commented on its red hue, suggesting it was laced with sedatives to drug the guests and feed them to something hidden. Specifically, the demon behind that door. Lynn stood in stunned silence. The old man made a sudden dash for the door. shouting for his son to escape. He fumbled with the keys, opening it. A thick red mist spilled into the room, then came the scream. The demon emerged with glowing eyes, its claws raised high. Lin gritted her teeth and charged, swearing to take it down. The creature met her with one swipe, hurling her backward into a pile of debris. Julian watched her land, hand clutching her sword. He wondered if this was the moment before her true awakening. She had asked about Mana earlier. She was trying to understand, but now, she was in real danger. Julian stepped in front of her, shedding his cloak, gripping his glowing blue sword. He said that helping wasn't optional, it was part of his mission. He also said he couldn't let the prized disciple of the Sword Saint fall in battle. As the demon lunged, Julian activated his system trait. Insight activated. A sharp flash filled his vision. The demon's stats and weaknesses snapped into view. He attacked in a flurry, his strikes swift and precise. Blood sprayed, but the creature regenerated quickly. Lin re-entered the fray, but the demon kept healing. Julian shouted for her to create an opening. Lin, breathless and struggling, caught sight of the soup bowl. An idea sparked. She grabbed it and smashed it into the demon's face. The creature staggered, dazed. Lin closed her eyes, concentrating. Her sword flared with light. She focused everything into her next strike, but the demon lashed out, grabbing her. She gasped, blood dripping from her mouth. Her sword dropped. In her mind, regret swirled. She had failed to even open a path for Julian. She thought she no longer had the right to face her master. The demon opened its mouth, fangs glistening. Julian's voice rang out, sharp and clear. He called her name. She turned. His red eyes blazed, green light from the system swirling around him. He told her she had done well. The demon growled and scanned the room. Then, a surge of electricity snapped through its body. Julian's eyes flashed green as he drove his sword clean through the demon's chest. The creature's grip on Lin loosened, claws slipping away as its strength crumbled. Lin, still caught in its grasp, twisted her body and delivered a fierce kick to its face, forcing the beast deeper onto Julian's blade. The impact echoed through the alley. The demon let out a final, ragged hiss before collapsing in a heap, blood spreading across the ground beneath it. Julian stood still, victorious but wary. Lin stared at the fallen creature, breathing hard. She said she couldn't believe he had pierced the demon without even using the moonlight sword. She asked how it was possible. Julian grinned, blood streaking the edge of his mouth. He replied that the demon hadn't been worth the moonlight sword, though inside, panic fluttered. He silently hoped that reaction was convincing enough. Back at the palace, the two stepped off the carriage. Julian announced they had returned. As they walked the tree-lined path, he rolled his shoulder and sighed, thinking that at least they'd made it back in one piece. And more importantly, Lady Lin hadn't grown suspicious. That was a relief. She suddenly stopped, forcing him to pause as well. She bowed her head, jaw tight, and said the reward should go to him. She insisted she hadn't contributed anything. Julian glanced at her silently. For someone as proud as Lin, this kind of admission didn't come easy. He told her not to say that. With a relaxed smile, he added that while she may have been outmatched against the demon, that didn't mean she hadn't played her part. Lin frowned, clearly displeased with his attempt at comfort. Kindness didn't carry much weight with her. She looked away and said flatly that she didn't like him. Julian stayed calm, telling her she seemed tense. She straightened, clasping her hands and facing him directly. Her voice was steady as she quoted her master. Great power came with great responsibility. She recalled his reckless, overwhelming power during the fight, then spoke sharply. She finally understood why her master had expelled him. It was his lack of restraint. Julian smiled thinly, touching his chin with a trace of arrogance. He repeated her words with disdain and said that restraint was a weapon for cowards. Lin's fists clenched. She shouted back, demanding if that meant he was calling her master a coward. Julian stepped closer, his presence alone enough to make her tense. He said he wasn't a noble, not some sheltered aristocrat who worshipped restraint. Then, with a parting glance, he added that she'd have to learn the hard way. People like him existed in this world. Confused, Lin muttered to herself, wondering what that even meant. Julian simply waved over his shoulder, grinning. He thanked her sarcastically for giving up her share of the mission reward and walked off, leaving her alone under the palace lights. Frustrated, Lin sighed. She said he was impossible to figure out. She turned and walked away, troubled. She whispered that restraint wasn't just for nobles. A carriage rolled up beside her, and a familiar voice called out, asking if she was heading home. Lin looked up. It was her uncle, Urgen. He offered her a ride and said she looked tired. She accepted with a quiet, polite yes. The carriage rattled gently as it rolled toward the Rondebel estate. Inside, Urgen asked how the mission had gone. He said it must have been difficult. Lin replied that it was mostly smooth and thanked him. Then he asked about her companion, the man who had been with her. Lin replied that it had been Julian of the one eye. Urgen nodded, his expression darkening. He said he thought so. He remembered Julian's rebellious look and mentioned that the Elder Council was nearing collapse because of him. Rumors claimed he was using the royal family to pressure the council. Lin listened quietly and answered that she understood. Urgen crossed his arms and shook his head. He said nobles shouldn't act like that. He called Julian reckless, out of line. His next words struck something in Lin. He mentioned Julian being from a branch family. Her eyes widened slightly. She remembered Julian's words earlier, and suddenly it clicked. So that's what he meant. Urgen continued, warning her to stay away from Julian. He said the man was dangerous, like a wild horse. Then he softened and told her she'd already proven herself as Hayden's disciple. Maybe Julian wasn't as strong as people once thought. Lin, after a pause, replied slowly. She said that wasn't true. She turned toward her uncle, her eyes steady, and added that no matter what else Julian was, he was strong. Even she had to admit that now. The sky had gone dark, the estate glowing golden beneath the stars. Elsewhere, in a dimly lit room, a figure leaned forward. The voice of Commander Ordwin pierced the silence. She asked what Julian had done this time. Her expression was grim, eyes sharp. Julian gave a weak laugh, pretending confusion. He asked what she meant, but inside, his mind raced. He imagined the tavern incident, the complaints, the collateral damage. His confidence cracked. Ordwin held up 2 papers and explained that a criminal named Baden, wanted by the One Eye, had turned himself in. She stared at Julian. When questioned, Baden had named Julian as the reason. Julian exhaled slowly. Just Baden. That was fine. He relaxed slightly and shrugged, claiming Baden must have realized his own guilt too late. He feigned innocence, pretending not to know why his name had come up. Ordwin didn't press. She passed him a sheet and told him to review the mission payout and report back. Julian's face lit up. He muttered to himself that money was finally coming in. He remembered the note from earlier, something about the jeweler. He'd been excited, but as he read the slip of paper, his heart sank. It said they didn't have enough nars for a batch of moonstones. He mocked himself silently. Of course Julian didn't understand savings. As his eyes scanned the payout details, he froze. 11,000 nars. His heart stopped. That was nearly 15,000 in real currency. He covered his mouth, calculating furiously. Even with Lin's share factored in, that was impressive. But before he could celebrate, Ordwin spoke again. She said this payout was low. Injuries had kept her sidelined. Julian stared at her in disbelief. This was considered low. He noticed deductions. Maintenance fees. Registration. Installments. His fingers shook as he found the final line. Net payout, 900 nars. His jaw clenched. That was all. Panic settled in. He thought of the moonstones. They needed massive funding, and he had none. He turned slowly, calling to Ordwin. She responded flatly. He asked if any new missions were available. Surprised by his sudden initiative, she raised an eyebrow and asked if he was short on cash. She then sighed and told him there weren't any for now. She warned him again. He had been told not to spend beyond his means, and now he was paying for it. Julian looked away, grumbling. He thought that if he just handled things himself, he wouldn't be this frustrated. Ordwin teased him, saying he could sell his luxuries to an art gallery and probably buy a castle. Julian's eyes lit up. Without another word, he turned and rushed off. Ordwin blinked, confused, and asked where he was going. Julian glanced back with a mischievous grin and declared that he was going to sell everything. Ordwin stared after him, baffled. She muttered that he had truly lost his mind. Elsewhere, 2 nobles cloaked in brown passed through a grand doorway. Urgen's voice echoed first, stating that Julian had defeated a demon without even using the moonlight sword. He called Julian dangerous, untamed. Aiden, another council elder, gave a quiet chuckle. He said he understood. A servant approached Aiden, offering to escort him. Aiden waved him off, saying he had more to discuss with his subordinate. In the shadows, another figure spoke. He said the Elder Council clearly didn't favor Julian. Then he leaned back with a grin. He repeated what he'd heard. That Julian had taken down a demon without even drawing his best weapon. The man across from him confirmed it. Yes, sir. Unsettled, the figure leaned forward and gave his order. He said they'd recruit that monster and make him part of their strength. Back at the Eid Cosmos Art Gallery, Julian wandered through the displays, eyeing the art. He muttered to himself that now was the time to sell. He just wasn't sure if the piece would be worth anything. A pale-faced appraiser appeared and greeted him warmly. "W welcome, Sir Julian." Julian smiled and offered his hand in thanks. The appraiser, Perso, followed him eagerly. He asked if the piece under the cloth was what Julian had brought. Julian nodded. Perso pulled the cover off to reveal a striking painting. His eyes gleamed as he examined it with a monocle. He commented on the unique brushwork and guessed it could be by Carusius Vincent. Julian leaned in, curious. But Perso then shook his head. He said it wasn't authentic, it was a fake. Julian froze. A fake? He cursed himself inwardly. He remembered where he got it. Hanging in the villa's entrance. He thought it was a masterpiece. Now it was nothing more than a well-made imitation. Perso, however, seemed impressed. He said he had never seen such a finely crafted fake. Then he grinned and declared he wanted to buy it. Julian blinked, stunned. Even though it was fake? Perso nodded, saying the condition was excellent. He offered 1,000 nars. Julian rubbed the back of his neck. He assumed the offer was out of pity, but money was money. It wasn't enough for the moonstones, though. As Perso left to prepare the contract, he invited Julian to browse the other works. Julian nodded, then stopped as a new voice chimed in. Eileen had entered. Her presence lit the room, and she spoke softly. She asked if selling it at that price was really okay, because that painting, she said, was definitely the original. Lady Eileen's sudden arrival snapped Julian's attention like a whip. He spun on his heel, eyes sharp as steel, his voice low and biting with suspicion. He demanded to know what she was doing there, and what she meant by original. His arms crossed tightly, locking his eyes on hers. His pulse surged with a mix of curiosity and caution. He stood firm, waiting for her reply. Eileen tilted her head slightly as her gaze swept toward Perso, who quivered where he stood, clutching the painting as if it were the only thing anchoring him to reality. Her voice turned hard, no trace of doubt within it. She said her cousin had a few works displayed in the gallery, but that wasn't the point. Her tone shifted suddenly, and with it, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Her stare hit Perso like a hammer, silent yet suffocating, weighing on his shoulders with invisible force. His hands shook, the painting wobbling, sweat beading on his forehead as if he might crumble under the pressure. Eileen stepped forward, her voice cut through the silence like a cold blade. She declared that no one in the Empire painted with oil in such a way. She seized the canvas from Perso, her fingers gliding along the surface. She halted, her hand pointing to a barely noticeable mark in the corner. She explained that the signature was unmistakably Corusius's. Julian, standing just behind her, examined the painting with new intensity, his brow furrowed, eyes narrowed with thought. Perso, his body trembling, his face drained of color, stammered in disbelief. He admitted he had missed the signature entirely. Julian turned his gaze on Perso, his voice icy. He asked if Perso had meant to deceive him. The question struck with such weight that Perso collapsed, the pressure crushing his chest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. On the floor, he clutched his head, his voice barely holding together as he begged for forgiveness. Julian stepped toward him, but Eileen moved quickly, grabbing his arm, stopping him in place. She told him to stop. Her voice was calm but firm, her expression clear with both concern and authority. She reminded him that appraisal errors happen, and that no one was perfect. Julian halted. The fire in his eyes dimmed into reluctant restraint. A flicker of guilt passed through him. He thought to himself that if he drew his sword now, in front of so many eyes, he'd be the villain. He gave a short laugh, brushing off Eileen's hand. He admitted that going any further would only make him look worse. Turning back to Perso, his tone was level but commanding. He pointed out that if the painting was truly authentic, its value would skyrocket. Perso, still on his knees, his eyes wide and terrified, stammered in response. He bowed deeply, forehead nearly touching the floor, his voice thick with desperation. He admitted the gallery couldn't afford it, not even all his assets combined would be enough. Julian threw his head back in laughter, the sound echoing through the room, wild and amused. He clapped a hand on Perso's shoulder, his voice turning cold again. He warned him that incompetence could ruin a man's life. Then Julian looked back at the painting, frustration seeping into his tone. He said he still had no idea what to do with it. Perso was speechless, tears streaking down his face, his body trembling. Aileen spoke then, her voice low but steady. She said she would help him. Julian turned to her, suspicion flashing in his eyes. He asked if she really meant to help him. Aileen crossed her arms, sighing lightly, a weariness creasing her brow. She confirmed it, adding that she knew of one buyer who would purchase any Korskius painting without asking a single question. Just one person. Julian narrowed his eyes, studying her. He asked what the catch was. She said there were two conditions. First, she didn't want Perso punished. Julian agreed immediately, flashing a grin. He said he hadn't planned to hurt him anyway. Aileen hesitated, her voice meek as she blushed and laid out the second condition. She needed his help with something only he could handle. Julian smiled with relaxed confidence, saying he was available and willing. They shook hands, the air around them tense yet full of promise. Aileen's tone hardened. She clarified that she wasn't helping out of kindness. She didn't like owing anyone. This was a trade. Her help now for his help in Jelen. Julian laughed, saying that now he owed her. He asked what she needed, his voice laced with curiosity. Aileen's voice dropped low, her eyes turning distant like she was remembering something unpleasant. She described how a guard at Bayerl Academy had been patrolling when the air turned icy cold. He'd felt dozens of eyes staring at him, filled with murderous intent, enough to freeze the soul. Julian's brows drew together, suspicion rising. He asked if it was ghosts. Aileen shook her head, her tone calm but heavy with unease. She explained that while the administration had initially ignored the signs, things had escalated. Strange sounds echoed from the old wing of the academy at night. Guards had been attacked, some injured. Julian's curiosity deepened, his eyes narrowing. He asked what could be doing it, if not ghosts. Aileen's voice turned sharp, confident and grim. She said she believed it was a demon. The academy was protected, but she suspected a demon had slipped through a weakened barrier. A deep, mocking voice interrupted her. It belonged to Hardy Godfrey, a professor at the academy, who stepped forward with an arrogant smile. He greeted Julian, his tone thick with sarcasm. Aileen turned sharply, her eyes blazing. She snapped that he could at least acknowledge her presence. Was a greeting too much to ask? Hardy shrugged, voice cold and dismissive. He said they weren't close enough to warrant that. He questioned why she dragged someone like Julian into this. Aileen shot back, saying Julian was an expert in slaying demons. If they wanted the students safe, he was the best chance they had. Hardy sneered, his voice soaked in disdain. He said if she wanted to escape the shadow of her family, she should try harder on her own. Aileen's face flushed with rage, her eyes flashing. She snapped back that he was the one who needed to try harder, especially after his last paper had nearly failed. She suggested he rewrite it instead of mocking her. Hardy's face contorted in anger, the insult hitting deep. He growled that a branch family brat had no right to speak to him like that. Aileen fired back, her voice rising like thunder, demanding to know what he'd just said. Julian, his hand already on his sword hilt, stepped forward. His gaze was ice, a storm held back by sheer will. Aileen's heart raced wildly, confusion pulsing through her. She wondered if Julian was angry over Hardy's insult to her family, or at her own fiery temper. She stammered a plea for him to wait, but Julian had already drawn his sword. The steel shimmered under the gallery lights, cutting the air with an icy edge. Her heart pounded as she shut her eyes tight, bracing for what might come. Hardy's panic erupted instantly. He raised his trembling hands, his face ghost white with fear. Then, without warning, a small stone struck the side of his head with a dull smack. From the wall behind him, shattered stones tumbled down in a cascade, revealing horrific impish faces, each one with blood-red eyes burning with malice. Hardy let out a scream that cracked with pure terror. He shouted that demons were hiding in the walls. Julian moved like a storm unleashed. His sword slashed through the imps in a brutal rhythm, each blow swift and lethal. A deadly dance with no wasted motion. When the last imp fell, he turned, his gaze cutting across the scene like frost on glass. Hardy, now on his knees, screamed for help, his voice cracking. He wailed that a demon was on his back. Julian looked closer and spotted a small imp clinging to Hardy's shoulders, its red eyes oozing malevolence. The moment Julian's eyes locked on it, the demon flinched, as if scorched by his very presence. Julian gave a chilling smirk and stated coldly that it didn't matter whether someone was from the main or the branch family. He didn't spare demons. With eyes blazing, he told Hardy that if he wanted to survive, he'd better beg a branch family member to save him. Then, gripping his sword with finality, Julian drove the blade into the ground. A harsh metallic ring echoed, followed by an explosive burst of force that vaporized the imp clinging to Hardy's back, telling him that he was overreacting. Nearby, Aileen flinched as if struck by a wave of something sinister. She pointed ahead, her eyes wide with both fear and determination, and shouted that it was there. The remaining imps began to swarm together, their bodies swelling grotesquely. From their mass, dark magical tendrils erupted like writhing shadows, cloaking the space with ominous power. Aileen and Hardy both trembled under the building pressure, their hearts pounding in their chests. Then, the imps merged, forming a monstrous rat larger than anything they'd seen. Its crimson eyes glowed like fire, and its razor-sharp teeth gleamed like freshly polished blades. With a ground-shaking lurch, it raised one claw and slashed through the air. Julian didn't flinch. His face remained calm, still as glass. Lifting his sword, its edge catching the dim light, he spoke in a quiet, threatening tone. He asked if this grotesque creature was the demon's true form and mocked its pitiful attempt to survive by fusing weaker pieces together. His cold, scornful words made the giant rat hesitate. Its massive form quivered, its eyes flickering with uncertainty. But then it roared, its tongue lashing out like a whip, and it struck at Julian with brutal force. Julian met the attack head-on, charging forward. His sword sliced the air with blinding speed. The two clashed in a brutal rhythm, strike after strike, each one precise and powerful. At last, he landed a critical blow. The rat howled, a shriek of agony ripping through the space. Julian saw it begin to shrink, its form retracting in retreat. Without missing a beat, Julian lunged. Sword gripped tightly, he slashed once more, delivering a final, blinding cut that tore the creature apart. The giant rat exploded into fragments of dark mist. Behind a magical barrier, Aileen and Hardy watched breathlessly. As the demon vanished, countless imps scattered, dissolving like shattered nightmares. Aileen dropped the magical barrier, her hands shaking from exhaustion. She turned to Julian, her eyes glowing with a mix of wonder and admiration. She asked how he had known there was a demon lurking there. Julian offered a sly smile, his eyes gleaming. He said that was a secret. Inside, he recalled sensing a strange color while using his color of negation on Hardy. But he kept that thought buried. He mused silently that no one here would understand the game system anyway. Aileen turned from him, her voice confident, laced with teasing. She said they'd revisit the matter later. She asked how someone who claimed to scorn the main family could now be helping them. Julian raised an eyebrow in surprise. He repeated her words. Scorned them? Aileen's tone grew sharp, though still playful. She reminded him that he had once called her a tashaning half-breed. Her thoughts spiraled briefly. She remembered those words, how they stung her, spoken to a girl who had only ever been obsessed with power. And now, that same man was protecting the Branch family. It felt unreal. She reflected inwardly that he was still the same Julian from their academy days, righteous, but half-hearted. Her hands moved as she manipulated floating magical stones, their glow soft like distant stars. Her tone turned sarcastic as she continued, stating that everyone else might be too afraid to challenge him, but she wasn't. She called out his superiority complex, his constant disdain for both the Branch family and herself. Julian paused, a flicker of remorse crossing his face. Rubbing his chin, he gave a faint smile and admitted he had been wrong to say those things back then. The words struck Aileen deeper than she expected. Her breath hitched, her thoughts scrambled. She bit her lip, thinking that Julian had just apologized, maybe not fully, but enough to shake her. She looked up, voice shaky yet sincere, and thanked him. Julian stepped closer, his expression curious. He asked what she was thanking him for. Blushing, she replied it was for what he had just done, facing that demon. He shrugged it off, saying it was no big deal. The wall behind them, once damaged in the chaos, had now been completely restored. Aileen wiped sweat from her brow, letting out a long breath. She said it was finally done. Julian, a few steps behind, gave her a warm smile and told her she'd done a good job. Her eyes lit up, excitement surging. She said now that he'd slain the demon, it was time for him to meet the buyer of the painting. Julian was introduced to an older man standing before the painting, his gaze filled with reverence. The man sighed deeply and said that seeing the piece before his death brought him peace. Sipping tea, Julian asked what the man thought. He explained it was the final work of Korskius, titled Red Vineyard. The man, Alam Corney, vice dean of Bayerl Academy, nodded slowly, his eyes bright with emotion. He described the scene: a wheat field, torn by a violent storm beneath a dark, brooding sky, stretching into an endless horizon. Julian quirked an eyebrow, surprised. He thought to himself that maybe the man was an art expert. Personally, every painting looked like fancy paper to him. Still, he listened as Alam continued, his tone quiet and reverent. Alam spoke of roads stretching beyond the field, with no certain destination. He admitted he didn't know where they led. Julian nodded, his expression thoughtful. He commented that the painting gave off a lonely aura, as if the artist had poured sorrow into it. He mentioned the letter that came with the painting, beginning with the words, "I poured all my sadness and soul into this." Julian's thoughts churned. He wondered aloud if everything in the work was connected. Alam nodded, saying exactly that. There was a strange glow about him, a light that made Julian's heart race. Suspicion rose within him. He wondered if he was being doubted. His system gave a soft ping. Color of suspicion. Doubt. Julian frowned. Was there something wrong with the painting? But judging from Eileen's and the vice dean's reactions, it had to be genuine. His mind turned, calculating. So what was causing the suspicion? Before he could make sense of it, Alum Corney suddenly addressed him, his voice low but firm. He called Julian by name. The sound broke Julian's thoughts like a slap, his heart jolting. He responded quickly, his voice tight. His eyes flicked nervously. Alum Corney's sharp gaze seemed to pierce straight through Julian, as if dissecting his very intentions. He asked whether Julian truly understood the painting, and said frankly that it seemed like Julian had only come for the money. He added that while he was willing to pay a fair price and complete the transaction, he preferred dealing with someone who actually grasped the painting's value. The words hit Julian like a sudden blow, making him hesitate as a subtle heaviness settled in his chest. He thought to himself, eyes narrowing with focus, that this explained everything. Even if the deal went through, he wouldn't receive the full price. Regaining his composure swiftly, Julian cleared his throat, his gaze brimming with restored confidence. He stated that this painting was believed to be Carusius's final work and added that the artist died shortly after completing it. He pointed out that this fact should further increase its value. Alum Corney sighed, the weight of memory flashing in his eyes, then smiled with a touch of grace. He confirmed Julian's observation, saying that Carusius had indeed died at the very location depicted in the painting. He complimented Julian, saying he had underestimated his understanding of art. Julian scratched the back of his head, a faint blush rising to his cheeks, and responded that he was being too kind. Alum Corney lifted an eyebrow, his tone growing eager as he suggested they talk about the price. Julian nodded, a self-assured grin appearing. Internally, he sighed in relief, silently thanking fate that the deal was back on track. Alum Corney held up 4 fingers, his expression unreadable. He asked Julian what he thought of that offer. Julian murmured to himself, his pulse accelerating. He debated whether to push for more than 400,000 nars. Stroking his chin, he finally spoke up with confidence, stating that the painting marked the beginning of a golden era after Carusius's death and that its value was undeniable. Alum Corney's hand halted midair, hesitation flickering in his eyes. After a moment's pause, he stated that he would add another 100,000 nars. Julian's entire body buzzed with excitement, his heart pounding as he processed the number, 500,000 nars. It exceeded anything he had anticipated. He compared it mentally. If nars were dollars, that would be over 500 million won. He chuckled inwardly, half in disbelief, thinking how absurd it was that such an ugly painting could be worth that much. Lost in the moment, Julian didn't notice Alum Corney calling his name. The sudden address snapped Julian out of his thoughts. He smiled smoothly and commented that Alum could now clearly see the painting's worth. Alam Corney agreed and said they should finalize the transaction. Julian's joy bubbled under the surface. He recalled Perso's claim that the gallery couldn't afford the painting, even if all assets were sold. Now he truly understood why. Only someone of Alum's stature could afford this. Scene transitions to Bayerl Academy. Eileen stepped through a doorway. She greeted with soft respect, stating that she had come because he summoned her. Alam Corney, who had been quietly admiring the painting, turned to her with a warm smile and invited her to sit. With a simple gesture, he used magic to pour tea, his voice gentle. He casually brought up the old building, asking if the situation had been resolved. Eileen nodded confidently as she took the tea, a smile playing on her lips. She assured him that everything had been taken care of. Alam Corney exhaled, relief visible in his eyes, saying he had been concerned. He paused for a moment before asking if she'd encountered any difficulties. Eileen sipped the tea and responded with pride, stating that nothing had been particularly challenging. Alam Corney gazed at his teacup, letting out a sigh laced with guilt. He apologized for assigning her such a troublesome issue. Then his expression darkened, eyes sharpening. He said that what he was about to share had to remain confidential between them. He explained that he suspected the Dawn Society was responsible for the incident. Eileen's expression turned grim, her eyes narrowing. She asked why the Dawn Society would target the Academy. Alum Corney shook his head slowly and admitted he didn't know their motives. But he said there was circumstantial evidence, and that they likely exploited a weak spot in the barrier. He added that the matter was being kept secret to prevent panic. Eileen's face grew tense, and her fingers gripped the teacup tighter as her heart raced. Her thoughts swirled. A cult of demon worshippers, emerging within the Empire, targeting their academy? Alam Corney noticed her silence and reassured her, saying she shouldn't worry too much. He told her they had already strengthened security and would continue to protect the academy at all costs. Eileen exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing slightly. She agreed softly. He added with warmth that they owed their resolution to Sir Julian. Eileen's cheeks turned red, and she stammered Julian's name. Regaining composure quickly, she asked if Alum Corney had met him. Alam chuckled, his eyes gleaming. He confirmed that he had, and remarked that thanks to Julian, he had acquired a priceless piece of art. Eileen smiled with genuine warmth. She said she'd hoped to thank Julian for defeating the demon, but that he had vanished. Alam nodded as he took a sip of tea, mentioning that Julian had accepted payment and left in a hurry. He added that he had heard Julian went to purchase a large number of moonstones. At that, Eileen gasped, choking on her tea in surprise. Her face flushed in shock. She wiped her mouth, stammered in disbelief, and stood up abruptly, stating that she had urgent business, before dashing out. Alam watched her run, confused. He sipped his tea and wondered aloud why everyone was suddenly so busy. Eileen raced through the streets, heart pounding, until she reached the gem shop. The shopkeeper looked nervous. He apologized, explaining that they had sold out. Eileen interrupted, insisting that she was certain there were still some left. The shopkeeper shook his head, saying that Sir Julian had bought more than expected. Eileen slammed her hand on the counter, fury flashing in her eyes, and demanded to know when the shop would restock. The shopkeeper trembled and confessed that it would take significantly longer this time. Eileen's face darkened as despair took hold. Her voice trembled as she stuttered that she needed those moonstones for her thesis. Her world seemed to crumble. Tears welled in her eyes. She let out a sharp, broken cry, shouting Julian's name. Scene changes to Julian. Julian stood across from a man, a satisfied glint in his eyes as he held a glittering moonstone. The blacksmith asked if Julian wanted him to forge a sword using the gem. Julian nodded with fiery eagerness. He confirmed it and asked if it could be done. The blacksmith's expression grew more serious. He revealed a stash of moonstones and asked whether the sword could be forged like Silvermoon. Upon hearing that, Ruger Orland, the blacksmith, let out a fierce roar of protest. He stated that Silvermoon wasn't a sword, it was a mere decoration. He declared he would not tarnish his pride by creating such a thing. His face was flushed, his eyes ablaze with righteous indignation, as though Julian had insulted the very soul of the forge. Julian stayed composed. His eyes stayed sharp as he explained softly that he wanted the weapon for combat. Ruger slammed his hand on the table so hard it cracked, shouting that Silvermoon was a luxury item, not a proper weapon. He jabbed a finger at the blueprint Julian had brought, scoffing that it wasn't worthy of being called a blade. He said that if Julian wanted something decorative, he should go elsewhere. The argument escalated. The air inside the forge grew heavier. Ruger continued, his voice booming with pride. He said Blazing Forge only crafted weapons worthy of knights, true masterpieces like the sword of Hayden Reich, whom he admired deeply. Julian didn't back down. His eyes burned with determination as he declared that he wanted mana circuits engraved into the blade, addressing Ruger by name. Ruger shook his head with a scoff, amusement flickering in his gaze. He said embedding a moonstone in the sword's core was foolish and dangerous. No warrior could fight with a blade weaker than basic steel. Julian rubbed his chin, considering the problem carefully. A young woman stepped forward. She was Ruger's assistant, her voice gentle but unwavering. She told Julian that they only made weapons that deserved the Blazing Forge emblem. If the blade shattered easily, so too would their reputation. Julian's pulse quickened under the weight of their refusal. He thought to himself that this was a problem. He wanted the sword made here, at the forge where Hayden Reich's blade had been born. After a long pause, Julian raised a hand and said with resolve that he understood. He promised the sword wouldn't break. Ruger pointed at him, skeptical, and asked if he really believed that. Julian grinned with defiance. He declared confidently that he was Julian, and if they doubted him, they were free to test his skill. He slammed a heavy coin pouch on the table and said they could forge the weapon first. He'd pay a premium price. Ruger and the assistant hesitated. Their eyes flicked between curiosity and doubt. Julian leaned in, voice low and compelling. He said if the sword broke during testing, he wouldn't ask for his money or the moonstone back. Ruger frowned, thinking deeply. He considered Julian's boldness. After a moment, he finally nodded and agreed, saying that if it broke, they'd act like it never happened. Days passed. The sword was completed. Ruger presented it, his face filled with both pride and uncertainty. He said their best smiths had worked tirelessly and failed many times before succeeding. He looked Julian in the eye and asked if he really planned to use it in battle. Julian took the weapon, the blade catching the light and reflecting it into his eyes. He activated flawless swordsmanship. A wave of mana erupted from the blade like a violent storm. He nodded, confidence in every syllable, and said absolutely. He asked, ready and certain, if they should begin the test. The scene shifted to the bustling streets, where a crowd had gathered, their voices rising and falling like crashing waves. Julian glanced around, mildly surprised by the number of onlookers. He remarked that it was quite the audience. The assistant, her cheeks tinged with pink, replied with a shy tone, admitting that everyone was eager to see the demonstration. She offered to disperse the crowd if it made him uncomfortable. Julian let out a laugh, brimming with confidence, and declined the offer. Ruger then emerged, hauling out a set of iron armor. He struck it firmly, his tone brimming with challenge as he announced that the armor had been crafted specifically for the test. He emphasized that it was no ordinary set, locking eyes with Julian as he spoke. He explained that the armor was a full centimeter thick, composed of nearly pure steel. If they were going to test the sword, he said, they would go all out. He invited Julian to try cutting through it. Julian took hold of the sword, his confident smile widening. He remarked that Ruger had come well prepared. As he channeled his power, both his body and blade became wreathed in a vortex of mana, a storm of energy whirling around him. With a shout filled with exhilaration, he declared that too easy a target would have been dull. The crowd gasped, their murmurs transforming into a rising tide of cheers. Ruger gave a faint nod, muttering to himself with a doubtful gaze. He questioned if this truly was the sword of rumor. Even with the moonlight blade activated, he reasoned, the structure shouldn't withstand the force. Julian raised the blade, now glowing with a light as soft and cold as moonbeams. His heart raced with excitement. He noted inwardly that the sensation was different from before, as if the blade had finally found its own rhythm, its own purpose. Then, with a powerful swing, he struck the armor. A piercing crack split the air. The armor shattered in an instant, steel shards flying like a burst of metallic petals. The crowd exploded with awe, screams of amazement echoing in all directions. Ruger's face turned pale as he exclaimed in disbelief that it was impossible. The assistant covered her mouth, her voice trembling in shock as she asked how it could be. Her eyes were wide, unable to comprehend what she had just seen. Julian smiled, pride gleaming in his eyes. He channeled swirling mana into the blade. its energy spinning like an endless spiral. He declared that this was the true Moonlight Blade. Gripping the hilt tighter, he could feel its strength coursing through his arm. The assistant bowed slightly, her voice shaking as she acknowledged that even without Julian using his full strength, their custom armor had been reduced to scrap. Julian turned to Ruger with a confident smile. He asked what the next test would be. Ruger remained silent, teeth clenched, his eyes complicated. It was as if the pride of the forge had been struck down by the very weapon they once rejected. The mana still shimmered in the air like scattered moonlight, casting ethereal reflections over the forge's walls. Then, before Julian's eyes, a translucent panel appeared. The system displayed a message. The imperfect Moonlight Blade trait had evolved into Moonlight Blade. Julian smiled, heart pounding with exhilaration, his eyes glowing with satisfaction. A new trait had activated. He studied the sword in his hand, admiring its perfect craftsmanship, pride welling inside him. He reflected on the effort he'd invested. Not a single blemish marred the blade's surface. It was flawless. At last, he had succeeded. Ruger Orland stepped forward from behind, still shaken, awe clinging to his expression. With a hand covering his mouth, his voice low and filled with respect, he admitted that he had clearly underestimated Julian. Julian sheathed the sword in one smooth motion and turned to face Ruger, a confident smile on his lips. He remarked that sometimes, actions spoke louder than words. Ruger nodded slowly, his face turning serious, his voice dropping to a firm warning. He said that if the sword ever broke, so too would the reputation of the Blazing Forge. He urged Julian to wield it with that weight in mind. He turned back with a smile, his gaze steady and resolute. He promised that he would wield the blade with honor. At that moment, a man approached the heap of shattered armor, his eyes narrowing with amazement. Picking up a jagged steel shard, he muttered that it was Blazing Forge's custom armor, and yet it had been sliced through cleanly. He looked up at Rinna, voice carrying curiosity. He confirmed that Julian had been there. Rinna frowned, visibly surprised, and asked if he was certain. The man lifted another shard, turning it over in his hands, and said thoughtfully that he felt no trace of Julian's spiritual energy. He added that Julian was impressive, a swordsman who poured all of himself into each strike. He remarked that it would have been a sight to see him in action against the armor. Rinna let out a soft sigh, her eyes distant. She wondered inwardly if it could be true. She shook her head, brushing off the rising unease. The man turned toward her again, his voice low, laced with suggestion. He asked if she was concerned about Julian. Rinna flinched, her cheeks flushing as she stammered. He smiled at her reaction, his eyes dancing mischievously. He pointed out that they had just completed a mission together, then asked how Julian had seemed. Rinna lowered her gaze, her voice quiet but filled with admiration, and replied that he was truly strong. The man nodded, his expression sharpening. He then asked if she had noticed anything unusual about Julian. Rinna's breath caught. Her heart pounded as she turned toward him, voice quivering. She asked what he meant by strange. His tone grew colder, his eyes darkening as he clarified. He asked if Julian seemed like someone who might be involved with the Dawn Society. The words struck Rinna like a dagger. Her eyes widened, and her voice faltered in shock. She repeated the question to herself, barely believing it. Julian, associated with the Dawn Society? The scene shifted to Julian. He walked down the sunlit street, twin swords gleaming at his hips. He wore a smile, pride glinting in his eyes. He murmured that he was becoming more like Julian with every passing day. But the smile faded, replaced by a sigh. His gaze turned somber. He reminded himself that he couldn't lose sight of his true goal. He had to return to his real world. He couldn't live as Julian forever. He rubbed his chin, the weight of reality pressing against him. To return, he realized, the game world had to end. That meant reaching the final chapter of the story. Hayden Reich had to prevent the resurrection of the Demon King, Barbados. Shaking his head, his eyes reignited with resolve. He reminded himself again that this wasn't his life. His thoughts turned inward, voice low and steady. He wondered where they were in the plot. He noted that the Dawn Society was beginning to make its move, a secret cult trying to resurrect Barbados, the archenemy of Hayden Reich and Rinna. His eyes darkened further as he remembered that Rinna's father, Ron Bell, had been killed by them. He admitted to himself that he wanted to align with Hayden Reich's side, but said it wouldn't be simple. Stroking his chin, he mused with Julian's voice. Should he infiltrate the Dawn Society for information? But how? Just then, a new thought jolted through him. The system pinged. Intrusion intuition trait activated. Julian's senses sharpened. He felt a strange mana surrounding him, like invisible eyes were watching. He scanned the area, muscles tense, his voice low and alert as he demanded to know who was there. Seeing no one, he wondered if it was just his imagination, but he immediately threw the thought aside when he recalled that the system had alerted him. He speaks confidently, saying that whoever it was should come out since he already detected his mana. From the shadows a figure steps out, causing Julian to chuckle nervously. He asks the hooded woman if they have met before. A hooded pair steps from the gloom, the tall shadow glowering while Eleanor lifts her chin with a faint smile. He thinks that he remembers her as one very skilled at black magic and says that the Bishop of the Dawn Society, Eleanor de Michel, stands before him. He steals his voice and says that she is the sworn enemy of Hayden Reich, and he says that it has been a long time, addressing Eleanor and the robed escort as well. She chuckles softly and says that he managed to see through her disguise. Violet mana billows as she draws it around her body and says that such perception is to be expected of him, Julian. He squares his shoulders and says that he has a rough idea why she is here. She tilts her head and says that if that is the case, things become easier. She lifts 2 fingers and says that it is about time he gave her a reply. He presses his lips, sweat beading, and thinks inwardly that he actually does not know what she's talking about and that he was just bluffing. He forces a smile and says that he would like a bit more time to think it over. She answers flatly that that will not do and says that he was the one to contact them first to join the Dawn Society. Shock ripples through him. He thinks that things have already progressed that far and says inwardly, cursing himself, that cleaning up after Julian has become his daily routine. He steadies his breath and thinks that, no matter what route he takes, the original flow says that Julian will be defeated by Hayden and eventually joins the Dawn Society after seeking power from demons. He clenches his jaw and says inwardly that it does not have to be right now and that there is no time limit. Her eyes sharpen. She says that while that may be true, she assumes he realizes they might take that the wrong way and says that it could be his tactic to bring them down, that the whole thing may be a setup, and that he is a royal dog of the imperial family. He grimaces and thinks that she is suspicious of him. He thinks that joining the Dawn Society is dangerous, that if the imperial court finds out it would be the end of him, a shortcut to the worst ending, and that if Hayden learns of any association he will be forced into a path where either he or Hayden kills the other, which might mean he can never leave this game. He smooths his coat, forces calm back into his face, and says that he did not realize she held such suspicions. She lifts her hand from within the cloak's sleeve and says that he knows too much, Julian, and she says that if he were to back out now, she would not let him off the hook easily. He tips his head and says that if he does, she lets a smile cut sideways and says that she will not let him off easily, then glances past her shoulder and says, almost amused, that a Monsignor stands ready. The hulking hooded figure steps forward, gravel rolling under heavy boots, and the cobbles seem to tremble around him. He moves like a battering ram, shoulders squared, fists clenched. A low voice rumbles as she explains with cool certainty that the combat unit of the Dawn Society are much stronger than knights, and she says that he had better decide quickly or else. The hooded man tears back his cowl, white hair bristling, eyes burning, and he bellows that he, Pelkor, the Iron Fist, will destroy him. He pounds forward, the street quivering with each stride, stone flecks jumping. He bares his teeth and says with feral glee whether the other remembers this scar, and he says that he can still feel pain from the wound he received from him. The MC grimaces inwardly and thinks that it is Julian again, that it is truly tiring to deal with all of Julian's victims, and he says aloud that they must have met before. He shows a courteous smile and says that he apologizes, then says that he does not really remember small fries. Pelkor's face splits with manic laughter as he howls coo ha ha ha, and the MC thinks that he really needs to stop pretending like he is Julian. The next instant he vanishes from the spot, a streak of motion, and a startled whisper follows that he disappeared. Pelkor squares up and says that they should see how long that attitude can be kept up. A crystalline window flashes, and a system cold voice declares that a trait is activating, exceptional swordsman. Julian's hand settles on the hilt, steel hisses free. He meets the incoming fist and his eyes widen. He says nothing but reacts with a sharp intake, and his thoughts snap that he accidentally used the old steel sword instead of the new moonlight stone sword. Pelkor's massive forearm grinds against his guard, and his coat bunches under a grabbing hand. He thinks that habits are scary and that, for now, he needs to hold the opponent back for as long as possible. He clicks his tongue and says tisk while driving his blade along a tight blue arc. Thunderous exchanges ripple down the alley, blades and knuckles shattering air, sparks raining. He slides back and thinks that this is dangerous and that he needs to take some time, and the air turns violet. Sigils coil. A pillar of sorcery erupts, wrenching Pelkor off balance, then hammers the street in a geyser of shattered stone. Debris blasts outward. He staggers, coughing dust, and says Kuj as rubble clips his ribs and spins him into a wall. Pelkor's laughter rakes the smoke. He says ha 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 and taunts, asking how it feels to lose to a small fry. Julian exhales, shoulders heaving, and says ha. He stares at the badge glinting against his breast and thinks, with weary bitterness, why he has to go through such a thing, the thought flaring red in his mind like a wound that refuses to close. Julian stands in red flames and says that he is tired of having to clean up messes he did not leave behind. The white-haired bruiser looks over and asks if he can still move. Eleanor says that he should hold on, Pelkor, because something feels off. A blue system panel says that his emotional intensity has reached its peak. Julian rises with a purple aura. He glares and says that it is so annoying. Another system panel says that a unique trait is activating, open eyes. Crimson heat flares. His sword drinks the light, humming low. A system caption praises the flame's manifestation. The white-haired Pelkor stares and demands to know what that sword is. He bares his teeth and vows to destroy it. The red-eyed Julian moves first. Steel hums. A black bloom of blood opens on Pelkor's shoulder. The square rings. Pelkor stares down, then screams seeing his arm is in bad condition. Panic hits fast. He thrusts out a hand, rasping for space, begging Julian to back off. Then he shouts louder, demanding he stop. Red slashes rip through the air. The fox-eyed man weaves between them with a calm, mocking smile. Pelkor gasps and breaks into retreat. From above, Julian's cape flares. His grin turns feral. Pressure rolls off him in waves. The fleeing Pelkor trembles and thinks this power is beyond anything he's ever faced. He's a monster. Julian laughs softly, almost delighted. Terror reflects in Pelkor's eyes. Julian cocks his head, heat behind his brow. He wonders aloud what this feeling is and admits he's starting to like it. A system pane explains open eyes, exclusive to fox-eyed users, activated only at emotional peak. It boosts impulse strength, suppresses reason, and pushes aggression higher. Below, Pelkor turns mid-run, cracking as he begs Julian to stop. The pane adds a final line. The user becomes very aggressive. The fox-eyed man raises his sword, eyes glowing with childlike thrill, and says he doesn't want to stop. He vanishes. The blade arcs. Red light scatters across the stone as the sword impales Pelkor. A beat later, Pelkor collapses, gasping, bleeding. Julian watches and remarks that his Iron Fist nickname seems pointless now. Pelkor sobs, pleading not to be killed. A shadow looms, panting, eyes burning red. A pale hand grabs Julian's collar. Purple light swirls like moonlit water. Eleanor says that it's enough, don't you think? His pupils flicker. The glow falters. A system pane drops. Removes open eyes effect. Julian drops to a knee, coughing. Purple light shields them. He stares at the ground and whispers, asking what he's done. Eleanor studies him. He thinks Julian's aggression is surfacing more clearly now, and that the trait is dangerous. Regaining composure, he tells Eleanor that Pelkor started it and she agreed that Pelkor had been rude. Clicking his tongue, he mutters that she didn't say anything despite knowing everything. Then she waves lazily and points out that she still let Julian beat Pelkor senseless. Green magic spreads like seafoam around Pelkor, healing him. Julian stiffens, realizing it's a binding spell. His body won't move. Eleanor glances at Julian and says that after watching the fight, she's impressed. A faint smile crosses her lips. Her eyes glow soft pink as she casually suggests they work together. Casting charm magic on him, a system ping blips and disappears. She studies Julian, then states there's nothing to lose by accepting. Julian considers and admits quietly that she might be right. She begins to speak again, but Julian steps back and says he needs more time. Eleanor exhales and clicks her tongue. She scowls and complains that her trade still doesn't work on Julian. She turns to the injured Pelkor and asks how it felt, if anything seemed off about Julian. Pelkor, still bound and breathless, answers no. Julian is actually stronger. Eleanor nods and says she knew it. She adds that the memory loss was probably a lie, and asks Pelkor not to tell the other seniors while using her charm eyes on him. Pelkor stammers that of course he won't. She watches Julian vanish down the alley and thinks again that as expected, her trade only fails with Julian for some reason. Later, under the dimming moonlight, Julian flexes his fingers. They still tremble. He thinks about open eyes. How it saved him, how unstable it is. Images rush back. Pelkor lunging, the recruiter's magic catching him, those cloaked silhouettes that cheered for violence. He wonders what he should do next. He remembers Adrian's sharp smile and thinks that Adrian would kill him if he joined the Dawn Society. He'd never go back to his world. But he also remembers the recruiter's gleam, and the other side of the blade. If he joins, they might kill him. He exhales. Closes his eyes. The conclusion sets in. As expected, he has no choice but to join the Dawn Society. He presses a hand to his brow, steadying his breath. He tells himself it's settled. He'll join the Dawn Society. Not because he wants to, but because it's the only path left. He plans to get close, gather intel, and stop the resurrection of the demon god. Dragging his hand down his face, he forces a crooked smile that doesn't reach his eyes. This, he thinks, is the only way back to his world. Moonlit stone towers stand. This is Genmel Monastery. Inside, the Sun God Church is the church with the most followers on the continent of Rosenda. This monastery is under that church. Novices whisper that Julian the Atheist is here and say that they are sure he is here to purge someone. He smiles in silence. A nervous priest steps forward and asks what brings him to their monastery. He says that he is here to see the High Abbot. The priest stammers about the abbot and says that he did not hear that he was coming. Footsteps approach. A nun bows and says that she will lead the way and asks him to follow. He walks beside the nun and thinks that they sent someone to guide him. Purple light ripples and the nun's form changes. She turns with a smile and says that he is here sooner than she expected and says that she honestly thought he would not come at all. He says that it has been a long time and addresses her as Miss Eleanor, and he thinks that she disabled the disguise spell right in front of his eyes. He looks around the violet-lit corridor and says that it is impressive to have hidden the Dawn Society's headquarters within such a large monastery. She says that the Archbishop is waiting for him and tells him to be respectful. He says that he will think about it. He thinks that she is much more guarded than the last time and says inwardly that it must be because the leader of the Dawn Society is inside. They enter a hall where robed members murmur that it is Julian and say that it is really him and that it is true he is back. A voice asks if he is Sir Julian. He looks toward a masked man on the dais and thinks that he is supposed to be an archbishop, but he does not seem very dignified. This is as expected of Tenelron, shown as a regular farmer who was selected by a sacred relic to lead the Dawn Society. Eleanor steps closer and says that Julian is in the presence of the archbishop and asks him to kneel. He lifts his hand and says that he asks why he should. She faces him and says that he chose to join them and says that he must prove his loyalty. He lifts a hand and laughs and says that he is not here to place his hopes in some noble faith and says that he is here to establish a cooperative relationship. He spreads his arms while thinking that Julian suddenly turning toward faith is ridiculous and thinks that he needs to act shameless like this. He thinks that everyone here is aiming for his status and influence and thinks that he similarly needs help from the god they serve. Hooded members protest and say that Julian is rude and say that he is arrogant and is trying to flaunt useless pride. The masked archbishop raises a hand and says enough. He says that if it is to establish a cooperative relationship, then there is no need to test him like this, and he says that everyone other than Julian and Eleanor is dismissed. The robed members answer that yes, Archbishop, and whisper about what he is trying to do. He snorts and says PFFT. The Archbishop says that he is really as arrogant as the rumors and says that he likes it. He waves and says to follow him because he has something to show. The MC startles and thinks with a question mark. The Archbishop walks to a corridor and says that only bishops and above have access beyond this point. He asks if that is so. The Archbishop says that this is where the sacred relic is. He thinks that it is the sacred relic. Carrying a lamp, the Archbishop asks why he thinks he is showing this place. He asks why that is. The Archbishop says that he does not want to let him leave like this. He reacts with confusion. The Archbishop says that if they let him leave now, it would mean turning him into their enemy, and says that Julian allied with the Dawn Society would be interesting. Julian asks if he is fine with forming a cooperative relationship, and the latter says that he will grant him the rank of bishop so he can fully utilize the Dawn Society's power. Eleanor stiffens and says, "Your Excellency, why are you suddenly doing this?" He says that he is giving the hero of the northern battlefield the treatment he deserves. She starts to object, and he asks how she dares to question his decision. She says that she apologizes. He asks Julian if he is satisfied. He smiles and says yes, "Thank you, Your Excellency." The masked Archbishop laughs and says that he will show something worthwhile since he came all the way. Red liquid roars in a circular pit. They approach. He thinks that the golden chalice must be the sacred relic. The Archbishop says that this is the relic that chose him. The sacred relic, star of the demon god, and says that it can draw the latent power of the demon god Barbados into physical form. The Archbishop lifts a black object from the red light. He asks whether he has seen something like this before. He answers that it is a horn of a demon. The Archbishop says that, using this relic, he can create the horn of demons, the power source of the demons, and asks if it is not wonderful. A gray image of a horn hangs in his mind. He thinks that he has never seen a horn being created but understands what it can do and thinks that, if he were to use it, he is sure. The Archbishop calls his name. He says that creating a demon's horn is fascinating. He asks whether the horn can let him use a demon's power. The Archbishop says that is correct. He says that he has come to the right place and that the horn is what he needs to fulfill his dream. The Archbishop says that he can keep the demon's horn. He thinks that he is giving it away this easily. Archbishop Tenelron says that many demons must be sacrificed in order to create a single horn, and Tenelron says that it requires a lot of resources but gives that much power. Tenelron chuckles and says that he wonders how strong it will be in Julian's hands and says that perhaps Julian will be able to overcome the Sword Saint. Julian thinks that he is well aware of the power the horn can bring him since human-type demons are also created using this horn. Julian thinks that, rather than borrowing the power of a demon, it is more accurate to say one becomes a demon, and Julian thinks that he does not even want to imagine that happening to him. He asks himself how he should refuse this. Eleanor says that she thinks it is a bit too early to give Julian the horn. Archbishop Tenelron repeats that it is too early. Eleanor says that Julian has not decided to join them yet and says that the horn is the root of power in the organization. Eleanor adds that the other members would not look on it favorably. Archbishop Tenelron hums and says, "Is that so?" Julian thinks that he can hear everything. Julian says that he will return the horn for now and says that this is not the reason he decided to visit in the first place. Archbishop Tenelron says that he sees Julian as more considerate than expected, and Tenelron says that convincing Eleanor will take more effort. Tenelron asks if he can request a favor. Julian smiles and asks what kind of favor. Tenelron explains that spirit stones, the ingredient needed to make the horn, can only be obtained from the heart of demons with at least 3 horns. He says that the spirit stone is also the vessel that holds the remnants of the demon god's will. He asks Julian to bring these to him and says that this should not be too difficult. Julian adds that going out of his way to look for 3-horned demons without orders from the imperial court would be too suspicious even for him. Archbishop Tenelron says that Julian will not have to worry about that and says, in a red whisper, that the Dawn Society will take care of that. Few days later, inside a train, Julian thinks, what the hell just happened? Julian thinks that the Archbishop accepted him as a member of the society and even granted him the rank of a bishop. He thinks that as soon as he joined he received an order to hunt down a 3-horned demon. That they must have people planted in the imperial court as well. He thinks that they are too big and powerful to be called a mere secret organization and that they are almost like an entire country. He thinks that this is troublesome. Heron smiles and says that it is a blessing there is public transport connecting different cities. Julian answers that Heron is right and thinks, with a sigh, that he forgot about this guy. Julian asks Heron whether Heron is also going to Berneden. Heron answers that that is right and says that Berneden is where the Ascension Festival of the Sun God Church is held, and says that he will be going as the representative of the Kriphart family. He adds that once Julian is finished with his mission, he should try to enjoy the festivities of the Ascension Festival. Julian thinks that he should agree with Heron for now and says that he will if he has the time. An announcement says that they have arrived at Berneden. Heron says that then he will be off. Julian answers, Yes, Herend. Herend says, just in case, that Julian should not provoke Margrave Orinal. Herend explains that Margrave Orinal used to be very close to the Highlands family, which Julian obliterated, and Herend adds that Orinal therefore will not be fond of Julian. Julian answers quietly that yes, and he thinks that he has another thing to worry about, thanks to Julian. Julian steadies his step and thinks that he is only here to defeat the demons and that he should not have to run into Margrave Orinal. Margrave Orinal, seated in his office with fingers steepled, orders that Julian please delay the mission. Julian tilts his head and says that, sorry. Margrave Orinal continues that the city is limiting entry to the Pillen Forest to Sun Church members to prepare for the Ascension Festival. Julian states that the three-horned demon is in that forest and claims that the festival will be ruined. Margrave Orinal asks if the demon has shown itself yet and then argues that it has not, which is why he asks Julian to delay the mission. Margrave Orinal declares that the Ascension Festival is the pride of this city and that they cannot ruin the festival for a demon that has not been active yet. Julian, expression cooling, thinks that Margrave Orinal is not listening and that the demon could appear in the middle of the festival. Margrave Orinal proposes that the festival will be held in a week and suggests that Julian enjoy it first, adding that no matter how cold-blooded Julian is, he should be able to enjoy a festival. A child's voice cries, "Daddy." Julian turns with a questioning sound. Margrave Orinal stiffens and shouts, "T. Tarina." Tarina peeks in, eyes sparkling, and asks who this person is and says that he is really handsome. Julian observes in thought that she must be Sir Orinal's daughter. Margrave Orinal rushes forward and yells to stay away from him and to come here quickly. Julian, calm, wonders if Margrave Orinal really thinks he would attack a little kid. A system glow outlines father and daughter with the notice. Color of negation. Fear. Julian closes the discussion by saying that they shall continue this talk another day and steps out into the night. Margrave Orinal gathers Tarina protectively. In the corridor, Julian exhales and says, "Phew." Outside, subordinates hurry up. One soldier calls, "Sir Julian." Another asks how it went. Julian answers that Margrave Orinal was very adamant and says that he was not able to stop the mission from being delayed. One subordinate reacts and asks if that is so and whether they should recall the Shut Eyes members stationed in the forest. Julian stops the suggestion with a hand and says no, to leave them be. The subordinate stammers, "Huh." But, Julian looks over the festive streets being prepared and states that the festival will not be happening as planned. A subordinate, eyes widening, asks if that means what they think it means, while Julian's gaze remains steady on the city that is decorating itself for a celebration he expects to be interrupted. Julian explains that Berneden is where most players first come across a three-horned demon. He emphasizes that such a creature is not just powerful, it's catastrophic. With a hand resting on his chin, he remarks that the festival might soon collapse into chaos. He outlines the horn system. The more horns a demon bears, the stronger and more dangerous it becomes. From 3 horns upward, each demon gains a unique name and a specific ability. He cites an example, Hamelin, a parasitic beast cloaked in earthy reds, wrapped in a mantle of fur, its eyes searing with an internal fire. He describes its methods. Hamelin does not merely attack, it infests. Any area it occupies becomes warped into a personal fortress, no longer a place, but a trap. Entrances and exits shift unpredictably. The land rots into a poisonous swamp. Julian recounts how adventurers who venture in stumble out in panic, their bodies failing them. Some collapse within minutes. And even escapees are not safe. Hamelin wages psychological war beyond its borders, breaking minds as easily as it corrupts soil. He notes that these effects make the area nearly impossible to clear. The scene shifts to a quiet inn. Julian sets down a white cup, eyes narrowing. He reasons that Hamelin must be close to finishing its nest. He predicts Sir Orinal will summon him soon. A guard bursts in, breath steaming in the cool air, and announces that Sir Orinal requests Julian at the mansion immediately. Julian notes the haste and the guard, flustered, apologizes for interrupting his meal. At the mansion, Julian arrives already expecting the news. His expression is unreadable. Across the room, the Margrave trembles. Sir Orinal, seated stiffly behind his desk, speaks with difficulty. He says that his daughter, Tarina, hasn't woken since last night. Even the city's best physician is baffled. He adds that similar cases have surfaced. Children across Berneden falling into unexplained comas. Julian hums quietly, absorbing the details, and concludes aloud that it's already begun. Sir Orinal rises suddenly, his voice shaking as he demands whether Julian doesn't find it strange how a perfectly healthy child could suddenly fall unconscious. Julian, calm, asks what exactly the Margrave is implying. Sir Orinal, face slick with sweat, claims he has a theory. This is no illness. It's the work of a demon. Julian pauses, then confirms it. He says that the cause is almost certainly the beast Hamelin, hidden in the Pirun forest. Julian elaborates. The creature implants seeds in living beings, converting them into loyal vessels. He clarifies that the infection does not harm adults, but for children, it is fatal. He warns that for Terina, it may already be too late. Sir Orinal staggers back, shouting that it's impossible. Then he lunges forward, falling to his knees. He pleads with Julian, begging him to destroy the demon at once. He cries that the Ascension Festival means nothing now, only his daughter's life matters. Julian looks down at the Margrave and notes that he changes his tune quickly. He then asks, pointedly, whether Orinal truly wants to save her. Sir Orinal answers immediately, he'll do anything. Julian's gaze sharpens. He repeats the word, anything, and presses further. Would the Margrave be willing to act in ways that might endanger Berniden itself? Sir Orinal goes rigid, clutching a folded cloth. His breath is shallow. After a long pause, he bows his head and declares that he will take full responsibility for any consequences. Julian nods once. He says that in that case, he will proceed with the eradication of Hamelin. Sir Orinal gasps out a desperate thank you. A wide view spreads over a green field. Workers rush across it, carrying sloshing buckets. They splash the contents, fuel, over soil, stone, and timber. Mud mixes with the slick liquid as it pours out. An aide approaches Julian and informs him that the preparations are complete. The aide hesitates, glancing at the sun-dappled trees, and quietly asks if this is truly necessary. The forest is beautiful. Julian replies that leaving a known threat untouched would be reckless. He then turns to face the aide directly. The aide's voice lowers. He asks if Julian really means to burn the forest down. Julian confirms that this is not a clearing, it is a destruction. He notes that, in the game, this was the most effective way to defeat Hamelin. The aide mutters that Sir Orinal might be furious. Julian reassures him. The Margrave has already chosen safety over celebration. Julian raises a hand. He gives the order. Begin. Torches ignite with a snap. Voices shout commands. Start the fire. Burn it thoroughly. Flames race across the drenched earth, licking up the brush. Panel by panel, the fire spreads, vivid orange and blinding white. Within the smoke and searing heat, something shifts. A pair of red eyes opens. The burning thickets twist inward, bending into shape. A massive figure rises from within the inferno. Thorns jut from its limbs. Its gaze glows like molten glass. The silhouette of Hamelin emerges, framed by flames. Jagged lettering clatters across the frame as the beast lets out a soul-splitting roar. From within the flames, the demon howls. Nearby, members of the Shut Eyes unit freeze, then erupt into motion. They shout that it's time to fight, but before they can move, Julian lifts a hand. He tells them to stand down. He says he will face the demon alone. The agents stop in their tracks, stunned. One stammers, asking if he truly intends to fight a three-horned demon by himself. Julian responds with a faint, tilted smile. As he draws his blade, firelight spills across the metal, gleaming over the folds of his uniform. He confirms that yes, he does. Their presence would only slow him down. Flames rise around him as he steps forward. Embers whirl in his wake. He plants his feet, squares his shoulders, sword raised high.